Right. It looks like we're still waiting on a couple of committee members, but I think we can go ahead and get started. I'll give Laura a minute to queue up the recording. I think it's already in progress. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. This is our fifth committee meeting for the adoption of the 2022 OSSC. Thanks for being here. Today we do have a shorter agenda than our previous meetings. And so I'd like to start out by taking a look at that agenda for everybody, and we can kind of cover what the day is looking like. So up first, we have item 1 on the agenda. We're going to cover a handful of tabled items from our last meeting, and we'll start those tabled items with revisiting the discussion on care facilities located within dwellings. So that's item number 3 on your matrix. And we'll be looking at those proposed amendments that we shared with you all on November 9th. Then we'll also cover items from chapter 4 and the integration exercise that we covered last meeting. This includes committee member proposal for the H5 travel distance. Mr. Sandoval and Kenton worked on that together. So we're just going to reaffirm where we're landing on that one. Combustible dust, ESS, and then we had bulk storage of distilled spirits and wines. The committee basically approved that one, but we wanted to see it in its full form. So that's available. We'll take a closer look at that. And then once we have covered the tabled items, we'll move on to the new code review for today and item 2 on the agenda. And we'll take a walk through the draft of chapter 31 together. So quite a few pieces there, some public proposals. And that is what the day looks like. So with that brief introduction of the meeting agenda, are there any questions from the committee members before we get going? No. All right. Sounds good. So if we can turn to matrix item 3, we're going to revisit those proposed amendments and the care facilities within dwellings discussion. We do have an individual here that will provide some testimony. I was hoping to do that right after my brief introduction before kind of handing it back over to the committee. So just to provide some context and some background on this consideration as we revisit, the committee discussion. This is about the transition to a baseline requirement of a domestic residential sprinkler system for care facilities permitted by licensure to be located within dwellings. And it began in 2019. And it was implemented in April of this year. To provide some more context, the base model code permits care facilities for 5 or fewer individuals to be located within structures governed by the IRC as long as a domestic residential sprinkler system is installed. And they have this up front in the scoping language of the IRC. And it's different than the general automatic sprinkler system requirement later on in chapter 3 of the IRC. I think Laura's going to be able to bring this up on the screen so we can just take a look at the that model scoping language just for context. Yeah, so it's right there in 101.2. I think this is the 18 iteration. And so you'll see that exception. That's what captures these care facilities with 5 or fewer persons receiving custodial care or medical care or just care within a single family dwelling. It's items 3, 4, and 5 there on the scoping. So in our April 1 ORSC changes, the scoping change in chapter 1, we moved towards closer alignment with the national standard of care while still remaining significantly less conservative regarding the allowable number of care recipients. So you can see there, obviously the national standard limits it to 5 or fewer when they're in a dwelling, as well as the occupancy classification. So the language in chapter 1 of the residential code assigns. It says shall be classified as group R3 for all of these facilities. This alignment impacted 3 care facility types in Oregon that were previously covered under the scope of the residential code. Those are adult foster homes as defined in ORS 443-705, registered and certified family child care homes as defined in ORS 329A. And then another important piece and consideration of the alignment was the intention to clarify accessible design requirements for these facilities and to identify, similar to like a live work unit, where we identify that in the OSSC. It was previously in 419, it's now in 508, where accessibility or accessible design is required for the business portion of that live work unit. We, our technical teams reached out to United States Access Board as well as senior staff at ICC, just confirming our understanding that these indeed would be affected buildings under our suite of statutes, ORS 447-220, and would require accessible design accordingly. So that's a kind of a piece of this discussion as well. And the alignment was included in a January 2020 governor's report on the subject. And it was also broadly shared with stakeholders, advisory boards, the public and local government partners since 2020. So that was when we really had all of those discussions with that implementation coming in April of this year. Since implemented, our technical team has published 2 bulletins summarizing the requirements and identifying potential local solution paths for these customers to pursue. We've also worked with various municipalities and individual customers towards facilitating solutions on a case-by-case project-specific basis. And based on prior discussions with this committee, we revised the proposed language in the OSSC and provided these revised amendments on November 9th. These amendments allow the flexibility for the construction standards of the ORSC to be used for these facilities and do require, as their proposed draft amendments, do require a domestic residential sprinkler system and then also clarify accessible design requirements. And it's very similar, again, to that longstanding approach for all live work units within dwellings. So with that brief background, I know it's a lot of information, but I just wanted to provide it before we turn it back over to the committee. We do have 1 individual signed up for public testimony on this matter. And with that, I'd like to recognize Jody Orison for her testimony, and then we'll turn it back over to the committee for discussion. Thank you. Jody, could you please unmute and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Jody Orison. I work for City of Portland, but this is my personal set of opinions rather than an official City of Portland statement. Looked through the proposals. I do think that the new way that it's written, where it says if you have sprinklers go back to the residential code, it's much better than the previous. But I have written something and I'll read it to you. Originally, I thought there was a legislative change behind moving in-home care facilities out of the ORSC. The move to require sprinklers is such a substantial increase in the requirements from both a typical Oregon home and the typical small daycare. At the same time, we're hearing about childcare deserts, that I thought it must be a response to increased risks or systemic safety problems like dumpster fires are for apartment buildings. However, checked with our local fire group and no one knew of any fire incidents in-home daycares or in the overnight care facilities in our jurisdiction in the last 20 years. I also checked with Oregon Early Learning Division to see if this change came from concerns they may have had as part of their compliance division. But again, I was told they were surprised to hear about the new requirements and were working to help small in-home daycares obtain licenses through alternatives to the sprinkler requirements. If we're not seeing fire safety issues with these uses in homes as they've been allowed by code for so many years, then I don't understand why Oregon is raising a new barrier to affordable childcare and affordable elder care. I understand BCD's position favors allowing existing licensed care facilities to continue or expand, but that doesn't seem equitable to new small business owners when the industry needs more care facilities. People starting up a small daycare usually do not have the capital to build a new structure, complete a significant remodel to tear up their walls and ceilings to install sprinklers, or to lease a commercial space, even a small one. It also creates a significant barrier to anyone who does not own their own home to have a daycare in their rental. I don't understand the approach of limiting the alternatives to existing buildings. If the use is safe with no sprinklers in an existing building, the same options should be allowed for new buildings. Although I haven't yet found evidence of fire incidents in any care facilities in Oregon, increasing the requirements for the 24-hour care does match the national standard of care and other overnight uses in the commercial building code. Commercial building code requires sprinklers for every overnight case, and the IRC, as Tony said, requires sprinklers even in single-family homes. Oregon has decided we don't need sprinklers in single-family homes. The OSSC and IBC don't require sprinklers for small daycares. So why have we decided when you put them together that you now need sprinklers? So I think all daycares, adult daycare, registered certified family child care should remain in the ORSC scoping with no additional safety requirements. I'm not sure that's part of the scope of this committee to be able to make that kind of decision. If that's not possible, then I have some proposed exceptions to the new language that BCD put out that would say, and I don't know if I can bring it up or not bring it up. That was a technical question I had.
I think you can absolutely bring it up, Jody.
Okay.
Thank you.
So it like for the group E portion. So if Laura, could you even put up like Tony's original or their original language? Or not? Okay. Yes. So under this group E portion, there would be an exception that says an automatic sprinkler system is not required for dwellings constructed in accordance with the residential code where the daycare facilities are located on the level of exit discharge. And this matches the sprinkler requirements for group E. So that's the concept. And then down in the I-4 portion, it would have an additional condition on the exception that says, in addition, where the daycare facility serves children less than 2.5 years of age, every room where care is provided must have at least one exterior exit door, because that condition also matches what's required in the OSSC for when you sprinkler an I-4 or when an I-4 can become an E. Any case, I can explain more if I need to, but I don't want to use up too much time. The basic premise is I don't think that daycares specifically should be in the commercial code when they're up to 16. I don't think we've had a problem, so I don't know why we're moving in an increase for increased safety where there isn't an observable or recorded problem. I could be wrong about that, but I haven't found one. So I think they shouldn't be in there at all, but if they are in there, I think that they should not go beyond what's required for in the OSSC for sprinklering. When you're allowed up to 100 kids, I mean, we're limiting it at 16. So that's all.
Tony, I have some follow-up questions with Jody, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
So Jody, in the second I-4 piece, I mean, the portion of the proposal for I-4 related to the exception, I'm sorry, I wasn't able to follow it completely, and I just wanted to hear related to the exterior exit doors, if it was predicated on the exception that that door be on the level of exit discharge, or if it could be on a different level exit discharge, as long as there was some other means. I'm just trying to hear you better, not trying to add to what you're trying to say. I just want to understand it better.
Sure. Laura's got the actual language. If you'll go down to the last one, that is the full language that I was proposing for that portion.
So that's what I thought. So in addition, where the daycare facility serves children less than 2.5 years of age, every room where care is provided must have at least one exterior exit door. And so I'm trying to qualify that sentence. And it doesn't appear that it's aligning to the language of level exit discharge. So that would mean that it would be all inclusive of any level. Is that the intention?
Well, the first portion of the exception is intended to say that you aren't even in the world of this exception if your daycare facilities are located on a level other than the level of exit discharge.
Thank
That
you.
was the intent.
Gotcha. I have no other questions, Tony.
All right, any other questions from the committee for Jody?
Not a question specifically, but a thought. I mean, I really feel like these exceptions benefit this change if the change is going to go forward, because it does bring it in line with the requirements for the E and the I-4. I really like it.
Yeah, and Jody, is the way it's written, as you see it, the Chapter 11 stuff would still apply, correct? It's only getting them out of the sprinkler piece.
Right. Yeah, I wasn't going to try to mess with Chapter 11 because BC has done so much research on that, and I'm not an expert in that area at all.
Okay.
I have a question about every room where care is provided must have at least one exterior exit door. And I'm thinking of a very particular case, the little old lady who used to watch my kids in her house with a daylight basement. You come in at street level, there's living room and kitchen. From the living room, there's a door out to the deck. Go, there's a fire. But from the kitchen, there's no door to the outside unless you trot through the dining room or trot through the garage. And I can't imagine it being, there's no room in that kitchen for another door. But if she had to put a door on the side of her house, it's, you know, several feet off the ground, then she's got to build a deck and a staircase and everything. And what's the intent? Like, what did you have in mind as far as every room where care is provided?
I guess in that case, I would wonder, is care provided in the kitchen?
Yeah, because they sit like on a little bench around the
Yeah.
table and have lunch, you know, that sort of thing. But
And
I mean, they're in sight of multiple doors. It's just
Right.
a separate room. So it could be seen, you know, it could be trouble with an inspector.
So at this point, I was just trying to match the language that is in the conditions of those less than 2.5 years kids being part of the E category instead of the I-4 category. I also recognize those were set up for commercial buildings instead of homes that have that sort of piece. An alternative I thought of, but I was afraid of introducing anything new, was a fairly short distance sort of exit access piece, like 25 feet or something like that, that would meet the same sort of purpose. But that would be up to the committee but anyway, that was another piece that I thought of, because homes, you're right, have lots of rooms.
Right, the
And-
bathroom.
Right?
Yeah, but we don't consider that a care room typically, even though they use the bathroom. And the one thing I would say, dining rooms oftentimes are kind of open into the rest of the house. And if it's open enough, we'll consider it part of that room.
Okay.
So there are ways around it. Looks
Okay.
like somebody has their hand up. Don?
Yes, this is Don Wall, and I agree with Jody entirely when you talk about A and E occupancy. Just like schools and larger quantities of little kids, you have to have 2 exits from the room. and direct exit to the outside. That is pure good safety for I and E occupancies. And then when you move it to a small daycares for mom and pop and people just helping out the industry, the classification of those as being residential or upgrading that code to an E for daycare, it seems to me there's a risk level that you can't afford to get additional daycare out of the community with all these extra requirements. A regular house is going to have 2 exits and 3 bedrooms, or maybe 4 or 5 bedrooms, and you're still going to only have 2 exits. Somehow the code needs to address that simple condition to allow more people to be small daycare providers, especially with the new codes coming up from the federal government that everyone's going to want to start something up, and you need to keep it simple without fire sprinklers and extra exits for friends to become daycare. I think Jody's correct with I and E, and somehow the Oregon needs to address residential code allowing 5 to 10 people, kids, and daycares in smaller areas, and keeping safety included without driving up the cost. Well, that was my comment, just following up and listening to concepts of future requirements. Thank you.
Yeah, Jody, I think your thought about adding a maximum distance to this, to me, that feels like a really logical approach, because most houses do have a front door and a back door, but they don't have doors from every bedroom. And I do think it would be a hardship to require somebody to keep adding more and more doors to a house. There's other security issues as well, because we don't want kids and other people wandering out these doors all the time. So putting a maximum travel distance does seem like a reasonable approach. I don't know what that distance should be necessarily. That would be something that we would have to discuss, I think.
I kind of like what she's done because it matches existing code. It's not like we're having to create something, and so that's always better when you can base it on something that exists.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to say that I like what she's done, and thank you for bringing this, Jody.
Can you guys hear me?
Go for it, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I see your hand up.
Okay, I'm on a headset and it's a little funky. I just have a little bit of concern about the travel distance from what she said about people who may not own the home but have the business in a rental, or the layout of the home. I've seen a lot of these very long townhomes in the city of Portland. So, I mean, I just want to throw that out to the committee.
Well, I can throw a suggestion out there. I'd move that we accept the language that she's provided here. I like that. I think there's a basis for it. I think it doesn't solve all the problems, but it's a good start with, like I say, a good basis for what it's doing. And then if somebody wanted to put together another proposal and bring it, we could look at that.
And just to verify there, Terry, using the basis of those November 9th proposed amendments as Jody has reflected?
Yes.
Party. Okay. Just wanted
Yep.
to confirm that. Thank you.
Yep.
Committee discussion on that?
Yeah, I can support that entirely. I think, in practice, if reviewers do begin questioning things like, doors in bathrooms and that adjoining kitchen to a room that has an exit door, then maybe this would have to be revised in a future session. But in terms of just addressing the main concern, I think this really deals with it well.
I would agree, Eric. I really like it. It's been one of those things that at the county, at Clackamas County, we've had our H3S department come to us like, oh my goodness, this is going to affect so many people. We've already had people coming in, throwing together sort of weird proposals to get out of the sprinkler system. It also, as a building official, it takes that decision off of us for these situations where we don't know that there really is a hazard. And I think it's kind of one of those things where over time we can see if there is a need to add more language or restrictions or exceptions.
Yeah, I'm in support of the work we did before and the exceptions that are being proposed. And I'm trying to qualify that distance maybe by looking at the common path that's available in the code and adding that on to the one exterior exit door within, and then place the reference to the other code section as opposed to actually writing a number. And that way it keeps it solid as if it were to bounce around in the other section.
You're looking to add that now, Mr. Sandoval? Something, does the committee want to make a recommendation on this and then maybe to bring back some additional to add to what is recommended?
Yeah, I'm looking at the code sections. It's not permitted, basically. So it doesn't have a distance in 1006.2.1 for that common path. So I'm not able to close on that recommendation. Sorry. And that may be because the model code wants sprinklers.
I think you could look at the E numbers. I mean, that's what all the rest of that's where I got those other conditions about level of exit discharge was from the E requirements for sprinklers.
And that's showing 75 feet, occupant load less than 30, non-sprinklered 75 feet. Maximum occupant load of space for E is 49 in 1006.2.1 on the level exit discharge. So that's quite a distance. That would take over the whole house, I would guess.
Yeah, that would be a big piece, a big house.
Just a question, I guess, to the committee. We're aligning it with the group E, and from a construction perspective, modern day homes are pretty combustible. So that I think that's might be one of the concerns. So just, I guess, comparatively, how combustible can a group E get relative to a residential house?
You can make it out of completely combustible materials. You just have to keep it to, I think, is it 1 story or something like that? So it limits your size. I don't think a home would have an area problem. It would certainly have a height problem, but we've already nixed having those facilities on other floors anyway. So it's residential uses above and the care facility on the first level.
Yeah, and the main concern I had was just that, there's residential fires are actually the primary cause of people dying. Now that's where people sleep. Of course, it's not where that's generally the problem, but that and the fact that these fires today are much, much faster in growth than they used to be.
So answering your question, Kenton, and supporting Elizabeth, the two tables I looked at for the E occupancy allows a non-sprinklered single story, 40-foot tall building that's around 9,500 square feet, which is pretty large area. And that's non-sprinklered again. So single story, 40-foot tall, and 9,500 square feet for non-sprinklered E.
Thanks.
I could add something too. We could also look at Chapter 8 for interior finishes that would be required of a non-sprinklered group E, for example. Because those are other elements, components when we talk about comparisons to the E and to the I4, right? We have to meet all the chapters of the OSSC that apply.
So maybe 803.
Yeah, 803.13.
Mm-hmm. So it looks like it's a C in rooms and enclosed spaces. Corridors are B. So C would be the most flammable material. B is less so. Exit enclosures, exit stairs and ramps. So we're not really talking about those pieces. So it looks like that would fit for most residential homes to C.
And those requirements don't change between sprinkled and non-sprinkled, right? For that,
Actually, the C goes into the corridor, so it actually allows more combustibles in the sprinkled one. Otherwise, no.
Right, but we don't. I mean, we typically don't really have full rated corridors in a house,
right? And stairs, right?
And the I4, it's the same. It's a B in both of those, class B.
Okay. Yeah, it's a little bit stronger fire resistiveness in a non-sprinklered R4 room.
Let's see.
The R3 is C's in both cases. Yeah, so the R4 is a stronger fire resistiveness in a non-sprinkler building.
I mean, typically, if the walls are, if it's chipboard, we're fine. It's only if they've got wood paneling or something else up there that that might jump from a class C to a B or B to a C.
Correct.
Yeah, corridors in a non-sprinkler building and E's and I's are required to be 1 hour rated. You're in a non-sprinklered building, your dead ends can be 20 feet is all. So those are kind of some of the numbers that kind of kick in the code.
Thanks. I don't have any further questions.
More committee discussion. I also see David Mills is here. David, I'm not sure if you'd like to chime in with any thoughts from the fire service perspective.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, David Mills, State Fire Marshal's Office. I think if I understand the proposal correctly, we're dealing primarily with childcare and not adult foster home. I think they're being actually listed in two different sections. I don't know, Tony, what the overall consensus of the fire service would be in changing, lessening the requirements from national standard. We'd have to kind of poll our group, and I don't have an answer for you on what our recommendation or for consideration would be just yet.
I understand that. Thanks, David. Maybe depending on the recommendation from this committee, obviously the recommendations will be heard by the governing advisory board. Maybe at that time, it could be helpful if you're able to poll the fire service folks and have some information there. I appreciate it. Any other committee discussion on this? It seems like I already saw a thumbs up from Terry. I don't know if it was an early thumbs up, but I think we got another one. We got multiple thumbs up. So I'm seeing the committee. It sounds like everybody's on board with that language. With some potential with travel distance using the November 9th amendments that were linked on the matrix as the basis, and then adding Jody's language from her testimony. That looked good. Am I
Thank
able
you
to
for
get
your
another round of thumbs up? Excellent.
This is Kent. Yeah, I'm supportive of it as long as there's that secondary review with the input from the fire code committee or the fire code committees, or from David and his group.
Great, thanks for that, Ken. We'll note that, and thanks, Jody, for all of your time on that. So that takes care of. Laura, did you get what you needed there as far as noting the information, the recommendation, and the additional caveat, let's say, from Kenton?
Yes.
Great, thank you. All right, we just took care of, I think that was like 12 tabled matrix items if we counted them, combined them all together. So
I like that.
all right, so now we have, so that includes that chapter 9 change. There might be something editorial there. Installed care facilities located. I think that's just permissive language. That was also highlighted on your matrix as kind of part of that suite of matrix item 3 consideration. And then the chapter 11, I think that's a clarification that won't be impacted. I just want to make sure that the committee's all on the same page there, since the accessibility portion was still included. All right. So with that, I think we can move on now to going back to our matrix. We have several items in chapter 4 that we could take a look at. And I believe the first one is from Mr. Sandoval and Kenton. And it was, I want to say it was that the 1017-23 tied back to 415 with the H5. So just wanted to reaffirm the committee's recommendation on that, make sure that we have all the language captured for Laura. Bring that up here. All right. Laura has it on the screen. And then Laura, do you also have the linked committee member proposal? I think Mr. Sandoval had done a good job of kind of outlining it in an email form.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was speaking on mute. Appreciate the information, Tony. So what I was saying was that, to be clear, the 2024 IVC did not have the connection to the emergency control station. What we had been determining through a number of different jurisdictional reviews is that there is provisions to shut down the ventilation system by other methods of the code. And this particular provision in 2024 requires that the ventilation continue during the egress period. So there is a conflict between what was approved in the 2024 IVC and what the ventilation shutdown methods are requiring in other portions of the code. And so what we were proposing as alternates in these other jurisdictions, and hopefully trying to avoid that here at Oregon, is to provide the language specific to H5 to allow that shutdown to occur once the safety of the occupants are deemed appropriate. In the fire study of the 1017.2.3, it was determined that the smoke involvement of the factory was worse when the ventilation continued. And so it became untenable within a couple seconds. And so the ventilation that's happening was required by the fire study for at least 15 minutes. And so there would be a subjective method of evaluating that smoke density during the shutdown. And that is with an H5 called an emergency control station. So the intention here is to add language that provides a means for the owner to maintain the ventilation in support of 1017.2.3 to make it a viable provision of the code. So this was not brought up during the 2024 code. It was only understood later as we start to implement this 300-foot travel distance. And so we think that the 415.11.10.4 is a good add to the emergency control station section. And this was also helped for me to understand better through Kenton's language and asking to take it out of the 909 section, which is all inclusive of smoke shut off, and push it directly into the H5, which is this increase. So it pairs up the ventilation shutdown with the actual occupancy piece, which is H5. So I think it's a really good combination of fixing the 2024 approved language with this added feature of the shutdown method.
Great. And thanks for that, Mr. Sandoval. I believe the committee already approved it. And I just really kind of want to reaffirm that, that we're all on the same page. And then also, we didn't talk about that footnote A to the table in 1017. I don't know if we captured that specifically, which is basically just a pointer to 1017.2.3. And I was assuming that that was part of the committee's recommendation. So we just wanted to reaffirm that so it's reflected for Laura.
Yeah, that was my intention, to take the entire 2024 amendment, which includes the footnote, correct? Yeah, footnote A, specific to pointing to 1017.2.3.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, Terry, go ahead.
Yeah, so Eric, I would recommend it then, in 2 years at the next code hearings on the commercial, that you guys bring it to the ICC and try to get that changed, because I'm supportive of this. So
yeah, absolutely, Terry, and I think that's going to be done because of the way that it's having to be managed currently in these projects. It's additional alternates that shouldn't have happened.
Okay, great. I think we're going to make sure that Laura has everything here that she needs on it. And one question there on the 1017.2.3 language, is that basically direct 24 IBC language?
Yeah,
that's what I recall.
Yeah, that was not altered. The 1017.2.3 was not altered. We just added the 415.11.10.4.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Laura, do you have everything you need on that?
So what I saw was, I was trying to format the language basically. And where's the original? Is it there? Did I just exit out of it? I bet I did. Let me open it again. Oh, okay. So I was looking at the original, you had sent the original proposal and I was comparing them. I don't know if it was the original proposal for number 4. And it said the other language, but this one was, I think it was from a comment below or in the description. So the 4 was different.
Yeah, the 4 within the proposal had qualifying language to the committee, and the final adoption was the one that I was proposing to
This one right
use.
here.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that I got that correct.
That's a good qualification. I can go back and check that again and again just to make sure.
Oh no, I was looking at the original thing you sent. I should have just gone off of what yours says. But I'm good now.
Great, thanks for that. And we can always touch base if something needs to change on that number 4 in the draft as we prepare it for the Mr. Sandoval's board. I think we can take care of that. All right, moving along. The next item on the matrix that we arrive at is we had a series of tabled items. Hopefully I didn't take them out of order. No, I didn't. So 4 items, 425, 424, 425, and 426 on that matrix. And there were a few different things there. We had told the committee at the last meeting that we would incorporate those combustible dust provisions, the new ones that were being brought over as part of that integration exercise. We did put those into 426. There was some discussion about the dust hazard analysis, which is identified now right at the end of 426. So that, and I think that was the language we were all looking for at the last meeting. So we have that there. And this is all the same language that we looked at previously, but now it's just in its correct location. So with that, I'll turn it over for any committee discussion there. Thank you.
Yeah, Tony, good work on the dust hazard analysis. I think that captured what the questions were in this last committee meeting that we had. I'm supportive of the language that's proposed here.
All right. Thank you for that. I saw a thumbs up from Terry. All right. Looking like thumbs up all around. Great. Appreciate that. Thank you. So that takes care of 426. The next one is 430. And this also includes that public proposal that I believe was tabled as part of the overall discussion. And so you see 430 is a little bit easier to kind of digest and work through now in this current format. And we can also include the public proposal 22-01 as part of it, which is, if you read the kind of the lead in on this public proposal, I do not believe the proponent is here to speak. I don't see your name on the attendees list. But if you look at the lead into this is being incorporated in the 24 suite of changes as well. And so that was the basis for it. And it's dealing with protection from impact with some additional language specific to garages. And in this context, obviously, it would be those governed by the OSSC, right? We wouldn't be talking about structures governed by the ORSC here. So I'll turn it over to the committee. There's a lot of information there. It's at your pleasure. So if you'd like to take a look at this amendment first, proposed amendment, and then loop back to the more prescriptive language, again, it's at your pleasure. So I'll turn it over to you.
This is Eric Sandoval again. I like the language that you've done in reorganizing. I know in the last committee meeting I mentioned using the NFPA standard, and I want to withdraw that proposal because when I went back and looked at the 2024 committee work on the national level, they were hesitant to move into it because of the lack of development within the NFPA standard. And they're hopeful that maybe the next cycle that would work. So I'm, again, removing that suggestion, but otherwise I'm open to more discussion on this here.
mean, this proposal right here, what we're seeing, it's just on impact protection, which I have no problem with that. I think that's good.
Yeah, it's pretty clear and I think would be pretty easy to follow as a designer.
Oh.
I think there might be a fiscal impact, but I'm not sure it is because some of the new technologies weren't available in the last code cycle. So we really didn't know what to compare against in the previous code.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that drives, well, there will be shortly maybe something that drives people to put this in, but right now it's kind of their option to put it in. So I don't know that that means there's a fiscal impact because you don't have to do it. So,
That's a good point, Terry.
Yeah, you can locate the ESS anywhere. If you choose to put it in the garage,
right.
then you're dealing with this.
Well, and it'll save them money because if they don't put impact protection, it's going to get broken. Let's face it.
That's true.
Their house is going to burn down if they don't put impact protection.
Remember, this is commercial, so we're talking bigger buildings.
Bigger houses, lots of houses. Yeah.
Their whole building's going to burn down.
Yeah.
I like it, Tony.
I think this
Nice.
is
I'm supportive of it.
Great. Thumbs up all around on this one. There are some just editorial adjustments that we'll have to make based on the numbering, of course, because now we're as part of the integration exercise. So you notice that the proposal had chapter 12 throughout. So we're going to have to change those a bit. But thank you
Tony,
for that. Yeah.
Tony, does it tell them what the impact protection has to look like, or does it just say they have to do it?
Yeah, it provides options very similar to what we
Okay.
know of in the OMSC and in
Yeah.
the IRC or ORSC as well.
Perfect. That's better if we do that. So, yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so then we get back to just the overall section here, 430. We can take a few minutes to just kind of navigate through it. I know it's a lot of information. See if any other committee discussion arises.
And I don't know if I said this, but the light blue is new IFC language, and the red is what we had in the OSSC.
And this will be removed completely from the OFC, like the other items in the past.
Paul, was that a question from you? Sorry, I didn't see it on my screen here.
Yeah, I'm just assuming that this is going to be, will it be removed completely from the OFC or will it be left in there as well?
So just a point of clarification, we don't control what's printed in the OFC. That's not any part of this process. Or David might be able to speak to their process and promulgation of the Oregon Fire Code, but that's completely unrelated to what we're discussing or considering here.
So Tony and Paul, what we will do is we will match, we keep what is in blue, if you will, because that is the in the fire code. Where there are changes, we correlate those so that if the items, let's say in that make that change would be brought over from the building code and put into the fire code. Sometimes the numbering scheme changes in the building code, but we need not change the numbering scheme in the fire code. So we work those details out, Paul, Glenn and I do, and Clara, when we begin the process of formatting the fire code, if that's helpful.
Thanks for that, David. And also, you know, in the past, I think during the integration and when we're looking at that integration, that's one of the reasons why we've tried to lean towards not amending those new construction provisions that are brought over from the IFC to make that a more seamless process. Another thing to add is that as we did in the 19 OSSC process, we do have a cross-reference guide that Laura produces. It's a pretty fantastic document. So then if we have design professionals or local government partners or other stakeholders that are familiar with using the IFC for new construction, they can use that reference guide. So maybe it really is in chapter 12 of that IFC, but where does that land it in our OSSC? So look for that once we get closer on the 2022 OSSC.
Yeah, Tony, I've found that matrix or that cross-reference to be really helpful, and a number of, it's kind of how I know that people really care about the code is when they ask, well, how do I get from IFC to OSSC? I said, well, there's this thing that the states put together. It's really cool. So it's nice. Thanks, Laura, for doing that.
I'd like to take credit for it, but it's Laura and Eric on that.
So pretty much this is all national language then, Tony, is that right?
Correct. Yeah. So the only edits that you will see will be numbering, very similar to kind of what Mr. Mills mentioned. For our side, it's just editorial updates.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm supportive of it.
Big thumbs up. Lots of thumbs up there. Excellent. Great. All right. Thanks for that. So we move along. We're getting close on our tabled items. We got a bunch of them done with one thing, and then now we're just making it through the rest of them. So the next one here, and this was one where the committee, it was right towards the end of the meeting. The committee already expressed comfort with the bulk storage of distilled spirits and wines and where that was going. It was just not as easily discerned on the screen in the chapter draft that we had at that meeting. And so here we have it again, revised in its correct location with the language. And also again, to Terry's point, it's model code with the color guide that Laura has identified for us. So I'll turn it over to the committee for this one.
Yeah, I think that the way that we continue to reorganize the numbering scheme to allow those specific Oregon uses to be at the end to kind of keep that out of the standardized numbering system, and also putting things from the IFC as they don't fit into other portions of chapter 4 at the end. I think it's a good philosophy, and I appreciate that. And I know it's a lot of work to make that decision and to figure out which one goes first, which one goes second. And then once that happens, all the subset numbering, that's a lot of work involved with those particular numbering and set. So to make that clear and doing the work you did here is good. I like it.
Yeah, as an end user, for me, it's easier to find a lot of these things consolidated in chapter 4, because then I can go in and say, yep, this is what our building is, and I can find everything I need to know about, or not everything, but many parts of the requirements are consolidated into one area, and I'm not having to go through multiple chapters in the code to find it. I like that.
Eric, you don't like hopscotching around the code? Is that what you're saying?
I've learned to do that, and I've gotten pretty good at it, but
I bet.
I mean, the old
I know.
UBC was organized more like this, and for me, that was easier at the time. I've gotten
Right.
used to the way the IBC has organized it.
Yeah. I agree. It is difficult to be going back and forth and back and forth. I think the accessibility code does that for us pretty well. So
I'm supportive. Thanks.
Hey, great. Thanks for that, committee. I'm doing an awful job at touching down on fiscal. So I want to just make sure that we thought about fiscal on the ESS, again, since it's an optional thing. I think Terry identified that there's really no fiscal there. Obviously, there's a fiscal impact if that option is chosen, but any of the other items that we've covered, we also covered a fiscal. I think Kenton provided a fiscal on domestic residential sprinkler systems that we have identified in the matrix for you. Anything on the combustible dusts, anything on the bulk storage.
I think combustible dust really didn't change that much, so I don't see much there. And I don't think the bulk storage has changed that much. The H5 one, there's probably, those requirements keep changing. I'd look to Eric. Is there much fiscal on any of that, Eric?
Yeah, it would be a reduction because of the standardized method of doing things, but also allowing potentially less stairs and less exit systems to support
Yeah.
the same factory method. So it's probably a reduction. In the combustible dust, I think you're right, Terry. It's a clarification. And the EES systems, there's just one more option to try out. So there should be no financial impact. And the bulk distilling spirits, where we were close before, it's, in my opinion, more of a clarification and no cost impact. So
Yeah.
Right. Great. Thanks for all of that. I think the one last thing, it wasn't identified as a tabled item, but it was a discussion. And that was about a pointer to the boiler code and what the statewide boiler program adopts. And so we have it drafted there. It's viewable in your link to chapter 4. And hopefully this is, again, I don't think we're going to get into any authority determinations on this technical review, but hopefully this gets at, I believe, Mr. Sandoval, particularly for your industry, you saw this as being something that was necessary. So,
yeah, this is helpful. I like the second paragraph. I like the boundary conditions of the first paragraph, and the second paragraph kind of digging into the process piping piece and referencing that. I thank you for taking the effort to put that together. The B31.3 is a helpful standard for those hazardous process piping.
Great. Any other thoughts? Look good. Good text box to have there. All right. Great. Thanks for that. So we're moving on right into agenda item 2, into our code review. We've covered all those tabled items. Getting into chapter 31. Does the committee need to take a break? Any bio breaks or anything? Or are we just going right through it, right into chapter 31?
I would like to get another cup of tea if that's all right with everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. At the pleasure of the committee, you want to take like a 10-15 minutes? Yeah, great. I have 10:38 on my clock, so we'll be back here about 10 to 11. Sounds like a plan. Great. Thank you all.
Hey, Tony, while you're still there, can I would say, and I should have jumped in at the time and I sent David Mills an email, but from Portland Fire's point of view, I would be definitely supportive of the amendments that Jody Orson had made. And I sent you an email and David Mills also the same, that we would be in support of that.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Paul. I really appreciate it. And is that all right if we could consider that, like a written testimony?
Sure. I sent you the email. You can use that. And yeah, I definitely would be in support of it. Being new to the committee, I didn't want to just jump in, and I actually tried to text David, but the phone number I had from it was apparently an old number, and it bounced back at me. So,
Well, I purposely gave you the wrong number so you couldn't text me, my friend.
I get it.
It's the same number I have, Paul, which is weird, but it's the same exact number.
That's a funny thing about David. He seems so friendly, but he's not really.
Well, no, I appreciate that. Thank you for that. I'll make note of it. And then, yeah, as we go along here, I think there's some things in chapter 31. Please feel free. You can just use the raise your hand feature. So then you don't have to kind of wait to jump in. And then we're trying to do this, as an open just discussion. So
yeah, that's great. And actually, we're going to take a break. There was a couple little things on 31 that one was just a verbiage thing, and then one is trying to pull over a definition from the old solar code that would be helpful into the OSSC.
Okay, so when that time comes and we're looking at the discussion, just please feel free to use your raise your hand function, and then we'll give you the floor.
Thanks so much.
Looks like we are just about back. Mr. Bressman, join us here in any moment. So we move into chapter 31, and a couple of things here. We can go to the matrix, take a look at the order through 31, and as we've done with all the other chapters, feel free, please, if you see anything in 31 that you want to cover that's not specifically on the matrix, we'll go through the chapter as we normally do. We can roll through it and cover everything there. So for matrix items, we'll take a look. Really, the first thing that jumps out on the matrix, Laura's bringing that up right now, is section 3109. I'm sure all of you are familiar with that. It's a long-standing section regarding swimming pools and the unique statutory authority here in Oregon. There have been quite a few questions about kind of those lines of authority delineation when we're talking about public pools. Obviously, we made an effort to kind of fill the gap regarding barriers for those private pools that are exempted under DHS OHA rules. And so we did that on the ORSC side. We're proposing that in this chapter 31 draft as well for review. And then we're also, the leadership at our office is also in the process of kind of going through those authority questions with council. And so 3109 may change, but it's drafted up here for you, and it's identified on the matrix. So we just wanted to show you there the first language in 3109.1 charging. We are aligning with basically what we did in both chapter 1, the 19 OSSC April 1st amendments, as well as in chapter 3 of the 21 Resi. So same language there regarding those barriers, and then the same language that's existed in that second paragraph. It was previously in a text box. So like if you flip open your 2019 OSSC right now, it's in 3109 in a text box, kind of a user's note format. So here there's really not any action or recommendation needed from the committee. We're going to, based on council advice, we will correct this if it's needed. But this is just going back to that statutory authority. I just want to make sure that we talked through it and made the committee aware of it. So thanks for that. back in the beginning of chapter 31, we do integrate. That's a portion of the integration exercise. So if there's anything there that you want to take a closer look at, please feel free. As we've done with most all of the provisions that are integrated, they're just model language that has been, moved over to the chapter. So after that, we get into 3111. And we have a series of public proposals here that are identified on your matrix in item 31-5. We also have a couple of matrix items ahead of that to cover. And we can just talk a little bit about, what this is, get a little bit of background, where we're at currently, and then a little bit about where we're headed and the new proposed amendments in front of you for consideration. So you all remember the Oregon Solar Installation Specialty Code, the first of its kind in the nation. It was integrated into the body of the OSSC in April of 2015 as an interim amendment to the 14 OSSC. Since then, the provisions have been housed there, and just minor editorial updates have been made, basically around design criteria, the specified wind speed, some clarifications on snow, and things of that nature. But the original intent and basis of the OSISC was to provide a prescriptive path, to essentially provide a very reasonable path that could be pursued for folks installing roof-mounted solar PV. So what we have here in front of you, as 3111 grew at the national level, and when we adopted the 19 OSSC, 3111 had changed quite a bit in that base model code that we were looking at. And so there were some challenges with also pointing our detached 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhouses from the Resi Code, Chapter 23, M23, over to Chapter 31 of the OSSC. And so you see these new proposed amendments in front of you. They're in that lighter blue color, clarifying through exception where you don't have to comply with the general commercial compliance path, right? We don't have to go to Chapter 16 if we're doing a detached 1 and 2 family dwelling. However, there's many other provisions within 3111 that we do have to follow if we're a detached 1 and 2 family dwelling governed by the Resi. So that's the first one there. It's matrix item 31-2. And you see existing Oregon amendment in blue, and you see the new proposed Oregon language there in light blue. And that is, we basically took this one exception and that listed all these subsections, and we moved it into each one. So now you see that's very similar language there under 3111.1.2. There are some others throughout 3111, very similar language. Maybe Laura can roll to those other examples on the next page. There we see it in 3111.3.2, 3.3, and then the same language, very similar language up there in 3.4.6. A pointer regarding flood hazard areas in 3.4.2. So all of that. So the first item there, so I'll turn it over to the committee for any discussion, questions, etc.
So I know you're going through this pretty fast, and conceptually there's no issue for me. I just want to know why some say exception before them and some of them are just straight up language. Is in the 3.4.2, 3.4.6, the word exception doesn't exist. Is that intentional?
Yeah, and we it is intentional, and it's based on the format and the language, basically the hierarchy that precedes it in the code. So if you look at 3111.3.4.6, perfect example, there are some things there. We don't want to exempt them from complying with like the electrical code, for example, but we do want to exempt them from complying with the mechanical code because we obviously have mechanical provisions in the Resi. So that's the distinction there, where we're still trying to capture compliance with the electrical code.
So in this particular language, you restructure the phraseology so that it says, oh, and so you can use the mechanical of the res code if you want to. And so it's not really an exception. It's just like, do this stuff. And then, oh, you could use the res mech if you want. So
Right. Yeah.
I got it. Mhm.
To me, that looks fine. The pointers are clear. Seems like it's a matter of going through and making sure you've caught all of the places you want it, but I don't take any exception to that.
For that, any other questions on just the change in adding those exceptions? All right, thumbs up. Looks like thumbs up all around. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to matrix item 31-3, wind resistance. And this is an existing organ amendment. It adds an option to determine wind loads with wind tunnel tests in accordance with ASCE 7. It's right there at the end of that charging.
Yeah, and because this is an additional method of compliance, it would not influence the financial impact. So I think it's a good option available.
Mhm.
Great. Thanks for that. So we'll retain that amendment. The next piece is the 3111.3. So within 3111.3, we have a bunch of existing amendments. It adds requirements for equipment, fire classification, BIPV, location, etc. So this is basically, we're looking at all of 3111.3 without getting into 353, the prescriptive, which is the next matrix item.
Yeah, nice work.
For 3111.345, that rooftop vent and drain clearance, there used to be an exception that allowed us to cover non-operable skylights, and that appears to have been removed. Was there, were there accidents, or was there a reason for that?
Good question. So if you look at the charging language, it's restrict the function of, so it's really a redundant exception. It wouldn't really matter. And then right up above, you still have to comply with light and ventilation regardless. So if the skylight was contributing to your light that's required, then it doesn't matter if it's operable or non-operable, you'd have to take that into account. Hope that helps.
But if it's not, if the skylight isn't part of any light calculation, any light quantity, then it still could potentially be covered.
Yeah, as long as it didn't restrict the function of the skylight, right? So if it's a non-operable skylight, there is really no function that would be restricted.
Yeah, as a jurisdiction, though, we would expect the solar industry person to provide us with calculations and justification if they wanted to do that.
Okay. And then way back in the, I think it's the OSISC, there was a comment about the pipe diameter, the plumbing pipe, vent pipe. Like we can cover it with solar, but only if there's a gap between the vent pipe and the modules equivalent to the pipe diameter. I think that was how it was phrased. I've got so many things open on my computer. Let's see, where did it go? And that is
The cross-sectional of the ventilation, right?
Yeah, the clearance between a plumbing vent outlet and the panel must be at least equal to the inside diameter of the plumbing vent to provide for adequate venting.
Yeah, so that's a still current interpretation from our plumbing chief.
Okay,
We've sent it out multiple times to various local government partners, other customers, still an active
still good.
interpretation. It's not even as restrictive as that language. It's so that it doesn't impede the cross-sectional required for that vent.
And it seems like what this change does is it takes it from a prescriptive compliance to just performance, right? It's saying before it used to give you that exact dimension. Here it's just saying that it can't restrict the function. And however, that's up to the interpretation of the person reviewing it, I would think. Seems like this gives you more options to look at in terms of how you could solve that potential problem.
That sounds Sarah.
Yeah, I noticed that some of the language looked a little different, so I just wanted to make sure everything was still good. We can still go over those.
Yeah, take all
There's
the
a-
time we
there's-
need. Yeah.
There's a really cool product. I think I told Jeremy about this. There's a really cool product that looks like a snorkel for your SUV you drive into the river, that you can attach to the plumbing vent and then go up and under the solar and then vent beyond the array. That way you can put modules everywhere. You're not blocking anything. But my Portland installation friends said that then you have to bring in a plumber and get a plumbing permit to attach PVC to PVC up on the roof. So they don't use it, even though it's so rad. It adds a much bigger cost than the $50 product cost.
Yeah, I mean, there
The
would
10-minute installation time.
well, there'd be licensure considerations, I imagine. There would be all sorts of things that would have to go through on the plumbing side.
Yeah.
Are there still plumbing labels, Tony? I know we have electrical labels. Or you can stick stickers.
Minor
labels.
Yeah.
Minor labels, yeah, sorry.
Yep.
I've been out of the industry for a while.
I don't have any other comments on it.
Okay. Thanks for that, Sarah. Any other comments on before we get to the prescriptive 31-5 on your matrix? Paul.
There's a hand up.
Yeah, sure, Paul.
So I just had a couple things as appropriate regarding the pathway. Just the verbiage that you use there. It says installation shall be provided with pathway versus with pathways not less than 36 inches. And then my other comment would be you see where I'm talking about, should be provided with,
Yeah.
right there, yeah.
Yeah.
Should say pathways.
Right. Yeah, just
Okay.
editorial. Yep.
Mhm.
And then my other comment would be, it would be really helpful if the definition of a solar roof that used to be in the solar specialty code could be included in the OSSC unless it's already been thought about. But this is I just put in the chat the definition that was in the old Oregon solar specialty code, installation specialty code, and a roof which solar arrays installed. And there's some commentary under there. And the reason why that's really helpful is because we do run into this a lot. As you know, there's a lot of installers out there, and they don't really recognize what it means to have an adjacent roof plane without solar panels, like on a standard gable roof. And, you know, this definition is good, and the commentary actually speaks exactly to it. And since, you know, with the OSSC, there's no commentary, I just don't know if there's some way that you can, you know, we can maybe even expand the definition so that it's clear for applicants, it would be very, very helpful. I use the old solar code commentary, as you know, Tony, frequently when I'm just, working with applicants in the Portland area, and just because that's the only commentary that we have that would work with those items that were moved from the solar code to the OSSC. So.
Hey, Paul, maybe you can introduce yourself to everybody.
Oh, sorry. Paul Jennings. I'm the senior fire plans examiner for Portland Fire, working at the building department in Portland. So, thanks, Terry. I can't believe everybody doesn't know who I am.
I've seen the name. I just haven't met you yet. Tony, in the language in the code itself, it looked like solar roof is italicized. So that tells me there's a definition of it somewhere. In the pathway requirements, I see where it says in width along 3 sides of the solar roof, and solar roof is in italics. So that typically tells me that somewhere I'm going to go find a definition for it.
And excuse me, I'm thinking that also part of Paul's comment was to expand, and provide
Yes,
that commentary info, but that's a great point, Mr.
I just
Bressman.
wanted to see if there's something already there
Mhm.
that we can build off of.
You'll also notice in that section of code, we have a proposed inclusion of plane, which I think is really helpful for folks, instead of adjacent roof, which is like, well, what's an adjacent roof? Is that, what are we talking about? So it's a roof plane.
So a roof in which a solar array is installed.
And that's the same, except without that commentary language.
So you are correct. Yeah, yes, the solar roof was moved over as amended into the 2019 OSSC. But the commentary portion is really what explains it to the customer. And so I don't know if there's some way that, as Tony was saying, if we could expand on that definition a little bit, since we don't have a commentary other than the old solar code commentary to use.
Yeah, so it's at the pleasure of the committee. You can make a recommendation that we would include some language, a note, an example.
I mean,
So we've used
the other-
user notes before. Maybe it's a box.
Well, the other thing, the commentary kind of went away when we put it in the code, and it'd be really nice to bring that commentary back. Seems like it's something that's already written up that explains a lot of this, maybe as a white paper or something. Tony, what do you guys think? Because that is where it really is explained, is in that commentary. Or
Yeah,
was explained.
Yeah, no, I think it's a valid point, Terry. And we can take a look at that. I mean, I think that's outside of this process, since it's definitely not part of the OSSC adoption, but we could take a look absolutely at doing something. Maybe Mr. Heiser and Kelly from our team could take the lead on doing that. I think there are some things that need adjusted in it. I always get nervous about 11-year-old commentary. But yeah, no, I think that's a valid point. We'll see what we can do. I'll add it to the list.
And I would just say, when you look at this portion here, in a typical gable roof construction, the south facing roof would generally be preferred place, blah, blah, blah. And then the north facing roof plane does not contain any panels, would be considered the adjacent roof plane. And that's where the confusion has come, that, we've had customers that come in and they just want to put, pack both sides of the roof fully with panels. And I mean, I've even had them think that one of the exceptions allowed that, and of course it doesn't. And this commentary has been so helpful in explaining it, because it says right there, where the north facing plane does not contain any panels, it would be considered the adjacent roof plane. So in other words, there's no panels, so you don't need the 36 inches necessarily on all 3 sides if you're under 25%, under 1,000 square feet, blah, blah, blah.
How would you handle a roof, like the same type of roof, but with east and west facing it's east and west instead of north south.
The same. If it's a gable roof, it's the same. Where we get into where it becomes more complex is when you have multiple hips. When you have a lot of, like, if you have a roof that is not a straightforward gable roof, doesn't matter which direction it's running, that's where you get into, it's a little bit more complex, looking at the hips and deciding where those pathways are required, because there's a few different things that the old solar code actually helped kind of define, like, why do we even use, why are these required? What's the firefighting requirements? I have a document that I give to customers that explains what the requirement is for venting a roof, and the use of like roof ladders, and it kind of really addresses everything so that a customer can see the whole big picture of what this really means and what it's for. And so, yeah, but I don't think, I think this example that it gives is really good, regardless of which direction it goes. And it, just like I said, it would be very, very helpful for the folks in the industry to see that this is part of the code.
I guess my question is more, the only roof that gets to be considered an adjacent roof plane has to be completely free of solar. There can't be any solar on a roof that we're calling the adjacent roof plane.
That's right. Now, if you had a gable roof where you put solar on both sides, you would simply be required to put your 36-inch pathways, which is the general requirement, on all three sides of the solar roof. But if you have one side, the adjacent roof plane, that has no panels, then that's when the exceptions 1.1 and 1.2 come into play, which it's either, if you're under 25%, you just need the 12 inches at the ridge line on both sides, or if it's over 25%, you need the 36-inch pathway from ridge line to the eave plus the 12 inches. And so that's where the confusion it comes in. They just don't realize what that means. And again, and as Tony knows, because I think it was like almost 2 years ago that we had this discussion, that we continue to use this definition in the commentary to help explain that to customers.
Yeah, it would be nice to have this language somewhere in the code so that it's clear, because a lot of times we'll have, a couple of, maybe the south and the west, or, something. But there's a lot of space, but we need the 12 inches, like we need it to be 12 inches at the ridge, because it's not a very tall roof, we couldn't do 2 rows of solar panels, but because without having the 12 inches, because we're under 25%, but we couldn't do 3-foot paths around those 2 sections, even if we're not using the north and east roofs or something. I don't like, there are times where it just gets tricky, and it would be nice to have the language saying that you need a solar free roof to be your adjacent roof, just to clarify.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, in the language there, the first sentence after note, a solar roof does not include building integrated PV solar shingles. If that shouldn't be part of the definition of the solar roof, to clarify, but then it does feel like the rest of this really belongs in the section. There should be clear enough language to describe this within the section that you shouldn't need to have commentary to explain it.
Right. Yeah. What about putting a figure in the code?
We can absolutely do a figure.
Yeah.
So a couple of things here. So we have a recommendation to somehow get this prior commentary language captured. So whether we're doing it as a note under the associated definition, or whether we're doing it somewhere within the section also where we've added plane as a descriptor. So it seems like there are some options there for the committee to discuss. And then also we have an attendee with their hand raised. Don, could you please identify yourself for the record and make your
Yeah, my
comment?
name's Don Wall, and I'm a professional engineer. And I've had people ask me about putting on solars on their roofs in the past. And as an engineer of record of allowing a project to move forward, you have to consider how safe things are and the boundaries of where you want to allow something to happen, just as an engineer yourself. So bringing something in the commentary would be really good to direct people of what is reasonable and what is safe. With BCD and state of Oregon of what you guys think is safe and a good idea. I've always wanted to look towards the mechanical code with more edge dimensions and safety to allow people to add things to their roof or work on a space and still not require harnesses and let something safe happen. And so my comment was add the commentary would be good to clean things up and have it be more complete part of the Oregon Building Code. And the limits of liability and suggestions go along with that. And I personally like the idea of the 5-foot width of arrays. You locate them as conveniently safe and away from other obstructions that already go through the roof. And so generally, you're lucky to get 40% of the roof, up to 60% of the roof to even be effective for a solar panel when you have other things protruding in roofs, let alone slopes and galleys and gables. So I think those are other ideas that you need to consider in a complete commentary for the future. I think that would be clear and more simple. That's what I had to say. Thanks.
For that, Don. So committee, I'll
Yes.
turn it back over to you. Looking at where we're going to place this, would you want to place it, if we're placing it in the language per Mr. Bressman's comment, we're putting it right there in 31113481. Is that a place to put it? Is it a note there? Is Elizabeth going to make a figure for us to put into the code?
You don't want me to draw the figure, Tony.
Fair enough.
Tony, I definitely like the verb, like having verbiage no matter what, because right, when it's verbiage that you can cut and paste or show from the code directly to people, you know, that's a picture, even a picture can be interpreted, right? Sometimes. But and I like the idea of the image too, but I definitely like having the verbiage in there if you can do it.
Yeah, it really feels like the pathway requirements needs to be expanded as well. I mean, I'm seeing one sentence there that I really have to take exception to. It says the bottom edge of a roof with a slope exceeding 2 units vertical and 12 units horizontal shall not be used as a pathway. What if I've got a 42-inch high parapet at the bottom of that? Why can't I have a pathway at the lower edge of the roof if I've got a code compliant guard at that edge? I mean, that I understand you don't want people falling, and I've taken the precautions to deal with it.
I think you could absolutely approach those on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
I would say that the majority, what we're talking about, are not sloped roofs that have parapets.
Yeah.
So,
well,
I mean, again, I think, on a site specific.
And tie-offs could be done too. And then again, those aren't typically done either. I just had a re-roof and they threw tie-ons on, but it was very surprised to me that was part of the installation.
I advocate for this language to be in the code as opposed to a commentary because, you know, commentaries are helpful, but they're not the
They're
code.
not code.
Right.
Yeah.
And I really prefer it in the code. Yeah.
Are pathways defined, Tony, in the chapter 2 section? It looks like it's italicized. Yeah.
Yep, they are. And also, while Laura's bringing that up, David Mills is still with us, I hope. And so any thoughts, David, that you would have on this? Obviously, these pathways are critical for our fire service colleagues.
Hi, Tony. David Mills, State Fire Marshal's Office. Yes, they are critical. I will probably refer to Portland, who sees a great deal of this, and seek Paul Jennings' comments in this. We do, as I think everyone understands, in a working fire, we often have to ventilate the building in order to control the spread inside and to remove the smoke, heat, and hot gases. So cutting holes in roofs is a very common firefighting element. And certainly we run the fear of cutting through with chainsaws. We're better than plumbers with chainsaws, firefighters are. And I use that just as a tongue in cheek. I hope you can appreciate that. But as the firefighters are doing their best, they're cutting through what they believe to be, at times, some structural members, but they try to avoid as much as possible because they're standing on top, the structural members, but they end up cutting through the roof. And our fear is that we'll cut through live lines from the solar array, even though the system has been shut down. And those pathways do give us access to ventilate the building. So I will say I have not heard a great deal of problems with this, but I would somewhat want to defer to our brothers up at Portland to see what they have experienced, because they have a little bit more background than we do at the state on this, Tony, if that's helpful.
And I would say, David, too, is, yeah, we look at, hundreds of these throughout the run of a year, so many. And I have my document pulled up that I send to customers. And one of the issues it specifically explains is everything to do with the ventilation and why we need the space. And for example, the 12 inches at the ridge for the ladder hooks for the roof ladder, right? And then I even have a link to Firehouse magazine that explains minimum size of a vent hole on an average residential structure, 3,600 square feet or less, the minimum size is going to be 3 feet by 3 feet. And so we have 36 inches as the minimum, as the pathway. You put it on either side, that gives us that space to work and space to ventilate. So yeah, there's a lot of actual material out there about that. And like I said, I've put together a document that I share with customers, and they always get it. Once they read through that, they get it. But it's just having some of that information up front would be super, super helpful.
Right. So we did have a question from Mr. Sandoval about the pathway definition there. Laura's shown us that. And then it sounds like committee's going towards adding that commentary language into the provision. So maybe we could, excuse me, maybe we could look at the provision and figure out exactly where we want to recommend that it goes.
Site that maybe pushes.
Is there a way to put the code and this commentary next to each other, like have it hover to the left or right so we can see them both at the same time?
Applicant tracking systems.
Yeah, I like the comments about the first sentence maybe belonging with the recommendation.
Right now.
You mean the definition, Terry?
Yeah, for solar roofs.
Yeah.
In the note, the first sentence says a solar roof does not include building integrated PV solar shingles. As Eric Bressman brought up, that really does belong there with the definition, the first sentence. But the rest of it, sticking it in the body of the code.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
So if we put the second paragraph right before the exceptions, does that influence the requirement of pathways in a different way than initially intended.
So
Yeah, I'm not sure you want to include the specifics about the south facing and north facing
Yeah.
in the code itself, because I think that's not really appropriate, but it feels like there needs to be a clear delineation of what's considered the adjacent roof plane, what is and is not. I mean, either pick one or the other and describe it for the purposes of this.
And we have language that says that the adjacent roof is adjacent over the ridge, hip, or valley, but must be free of solar or something.
Yeah, because we've had problems in the past of a roof at a different level and they try to make it part of the upper roof. And there's really no connection whatsoever.
If you have a clear story with the roofs doing this.
Yeah, or it's a two-story partial and 1 story in another part. And they try to claim the 1 story as part of the 2-story roof above.
If you've got this, you got 3 feet on each side, on 3 sides. There's no getting around it.
But you really don't have the access that you need.
Correct.
Well, as Sarah said, with 3
sides,
36 inches on 3 sides, you do.
Yep.
A couple of ideas here. So looking at the commentary language in question, it's not really code language, right? I mean, it's written with things like typically and generally and all of this stuff. So do we want to, we could consider including it as a user note. We've done those things similar in the past where it's in a text box. It's not a citable provision, but it's explanatory material. We could look at doing something like that, or we could make a recommendation and we could revisit it on the next committee meeting if somebody wanted to take the lead on working up language and where it would be located and what it would read.
Well, I definitely agree with Elizabeth. I like it in the body of the definition, of course, and I think expanded as Terry had said, but I do like the text of it to be or the main part of it to be in the body of the text. And I think a note would be fine because I think it would clearly explain it. I do think that we may want to take out the north and south though, and just put, one facing roof or something like that, some language that doesn't specifically say the north versus the south versus one side versus the other.
Well, Paul, would you be willing to take the lead on that? I'll look at it with you.
Sure, sounds good.
Opposing planes, maybe something to consider there. Okay, so it sounds like we have a direction on that committee. Was there anything else there in 3111.3 that we wanted to discuss before the prescriptive?
Tony, did you get the comments and stuff that Amit put together?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And a big thanks to Amit and to SEAO. Jeremy Williams from our team has been doing some great work.
Yeah,
kind of interfacing there, and he's on this meeting, and I believe there's SEAO representation too once we get to that prescriptive. So I just want to make sure, so get through this matrix item, and then once we get into there.
Yeah. And just so you know, we have Mike Wakowitz from our engineering group that's here today, since Amit couldn't be here.
Perfect. Great.
Yeah, Tony, I'm in alignment with those ideas of the note box and crafting the language, and appreciate Paul's support in that, and Terry working with him, and otherwise looks
I
good.
agree.
I think it's a good direction.
Other thoughts from the committee on that? So we have an approved with a revisit of just a small portion. I'm going to modify the existing definition in chapter 2, and then we're going to have some new language to consider at the next meeting. All right. Great. Thanks for that. So that was item 31-4 on the matrix. So we've now, if we're tracking along, for those at home keeping score, we've now moved up to 31-5 and the prescriptive installation. So this was really, background. This was really kind of the cornerstone of that OSISC, first in the nation to have such a prescriptive installation path, and I believe maybe the only, or one of the only, still in the nation to have such a prescriptive path. So the intention was to provide a reasonable, maybe a little bit conservative, but a reasonable path for prescriptive applications. So here we have existing amendments throughout 3111-353. You'll see the new language in the light blue, which I think is important to pay attention to because there are some adjustments throughout. And then we also have, it's noted as 3 public proposals, but it's really only, I believe it's really only 1, because one of them we covered back in chapter 16 and the actions that were took there. I think so. Maybe Laura can bring those up as well.
Yeah.
And then the other 2, I believe, are almost identical. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't find any difference. I was going to ask if anybody else could, or if it was just me.
Yeah, I asked Ahmed if there was, and he said there wasn't. He said that they were both the same.
And then,
and Tony, it looks like that language is, some of that is already in here. Is that the case?
Yep. So what we did,
okay.
Yeah, no, great question and observation there, Mr. Pressman. So what we did is we worked directly with Amit and SEAO folks there were some slight editorial adjustments, kind of friendly amendments that we wanted to work through and make sure that they were on board with. And so Jeremy could maybe come on here and chime in a little bit about that. But this draft in front of you is our BCD team recommendation of those if you were to accept those proposed amendments. Jeremy, did I say anything out of school there, or are you able to provide any other kind of background?
No, sounds right. And we also, we reached out with Sarah Pavey as well, also just clarifying some of the languages throughout this section as well. But as Terry mentioned, Amit has looked closer at these prescriptive provisions, and we just like you mentioned earlier, these are fairly old, outdated provisions in relation to current structural design reference standards. So there are folks that are looking at this a little more carefully, and potentially in future code cycles, after more stakeholder input, may consider different proposals. But I think at this point, if we wanted to jump into SEAO's, are you wanting to look at SEAO's first proposal for these existing HIP value rafters and framing provisions right now, Tony? Or
Yeah, it's at the pleasure of the committee. So we can look at just the existing amendments, kind of what we have in front of us. We could pull up that proposal and take a look at that in conjunction with the draft that's in front of you. What do we prefer?
I just had a question on this, and sort of in general. Well, that's just a little bit more specific. I read through the proposals, and I'm seeing the same language here. And I really love the idea of prescriptive solutions to these things to help people get through it more easily. The only question I had is in looking at that paragraph 1.2.5, and I know this same language shows up in a couple of other places in the prescriptive requirements. It talks about the supports have to bear on a bearing wall below. And I'm just wondering if that really wants to be bearing wall or foundation, because if you have a post, does it really have to be interrupted by a bearing wall? What you're really looking for is that there's a clear load path to the foundation, right? But when you say that it has to sit on a bearing wall,
Right.
I mean, the literal interpretation of that is we need a wall somewhere in here when we may not really need it.
So maybe
I'd be surprised if anybody made that call, but yeah, I guess they could.
Well, I'm just, when I see prescriptive, it becomes literal to me. And that's the only reason I'm seeing that. I'm thinking that somebody could interpret that as, no, it has to come down on a wall. And it seems like it would just be really simple to say on a bearing wall or foundation.
Yeah,
But
I don't have a problem with that.
what if you're looking at like a structural beam and stuff?
Right.
Then the question comes, is it adequate? A bearing wall, we know is adequate to take the load.
So maybe we can pull up, Laura, maybe we can pull up the proposal and the figure, or just the figure as we have it integrated to kind of give the context of what the proposal was accomplishing. Thank you. Perfect. So here you see that, and you see the note down here at the bottom on the right-hand side. Yep.
And that makes sense to me if we have a configuration that looks like that, but you could, the language that I was looking at specifically talked about a post, and why could that post not just go vertically all the way down to the foundation?
So I think I might have a solution that meets both language questions. There's a definition of bearing wall structure in the code, and we could just use that. And the definition says a building or other structure which vertical loads from floors and roofs are primarily supported by walls. And then you've got the primarily, which gives you some flexibility. It's still talking about load path, which you're interested in. And then it ties to something that's already been created, which for me is more certain.
Yeah.
As opposed to subjective. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be fine. I just know that, that many of the jurisdictions we deal with are extremely reasonable and certainly look at what the intent of the code is, but there are, we work in multiple jurisdictions in multiple states, and we don't always find reviewers that see things in the same light. So in my mind, clarity is better.
Go back to the language where you were looking to add that.
Yeah, so the 202 has the definition, and 1.2.5 is where the language was originating. So adding the word structure after bearing wall would align it with the definition, and just put that italics is what my recommendation would be.
I like that, Eric.
And I think that takes place in a few different paragraphs, though.
Sure.
I think the paragraph above it has the same type of language.
How does that sound, Jeremy? Are you okay with that?
That are in the system that
One thing to note, I think that the bearing wall structures is it's describing a structure type as far as for structural design in chapter 16. So if we reference, I believe it's in like 1616.
the agency
More
is
philosophical,
restoration
Tony.
on their end, right?
Yeah, so like if we look at the structural integrity provisions in 1616, it's if they are bearing wall structures, talking about the structure as a whole.
I see. Yeah, I'm looking at the definition in chapter
Right.
2.
I think the intent from City of Portland staff and SEAO's take on this or look at this was capturing some of what's written in the residential code in R 802.4.1. It's just some of the prescriptive requirements for supports of hips and valleys. And they use bearing partition in there. And then the one thing that they add in the residential code, it says, or be designed to carry and distribute the specific load at that point. So that's kind of the key, is that prescriptively, without getting into it, like Mike Walkowitz just mentioned, that there's just a quick check on these scenarios. I guess the other question is, if it's being added and you're loading an existing beam to mitigate it, then you're kind of outside the scope of this. So maybe it's just more thought, more question on this. But I agree with Tony here on this. I don't think bearing wall structure is appropriate.
Yeah. Now that I've read the definition, I tend to
It's too
agree.
defined. It leans towards the calculated method.
Yeah, really all you're trying to do is make sure that
The load
there's
is
a
carrying.
clear load path down to the foundation. And how it gets there shouldn't really matter, whether it's a bearing wall, a single column going down, or whatever other means. But the fact that it says a bearing wall takes away the use of a column going all the way to the foundation.
But I think they're saying it takes it out of a prescriptive method. at that
Yeah,
point.
column wouldn't collect the load. It's not adequate. So if you do a beam, a column, an alternate method, you shoved it into engineering.
Right, correct.
Well, but this is saying existing, right?
The whole point is people ignore the fact they try to load up the ceiling joist. The reality is that load has to go into an element that can carry it all the way down to the foundation. A post won't do that. You'd have to have a beam and a post and an engineered system.
Right.
So if you use it in the context of the residential code, that's where it comes from, of the prescriptive in the residential code.
I agree.
I understand where you're coming from, but then that takes us into engineering.
Right. Which is totally an option,
Yes,
Right,
but
but then
the
it's
whole
not
point,
prescriptive anymore.
but it's
Yeah.
not prescriptive.
Yeah, it takes us completely out of it. Okay. I think I see where you're going with that. I think I've been convinced. Sorry to
we're
have
not
wasted
trying
your
to
time.
create, we're not trying to create anything new. We're trying to
Right.
go with what's already prescriptive in the
Right.
residential.
And Mike, can I ask, are you seeing scenarios where, say, an existing valley or hip or existing rafters need the extra support to comply with the prescriptive path? And they add that support, they drop it on an existing ceiling joist, and that's the problem when they try to mitigate and move forward with this prescriptive path. This kind of says, well, you need to have the bearing wall or drop it to a existing bearing support.
Exactly. If you want to stay in the prescriptive,
Right.
there's no reason you can't engineer it. We're totally, but then
Yeah.
we're in a different review.
Right.
Right. No, I see where you're going now. I agree. I was looking at this differently.
And what we were trying to do We're actually trying to clarify because we get this issue over and over. And it already exists in the residential code, and we're just trying to bring it forward to say, this is what is required in the residential prescriptive.
Right.
Once you have that, your solar installation is simple.
Right.
How is this, how does this look on the plan check and inspection side? Because from like the crawling in the attic installation side or site visit, site survey side, and design, I see this as, oh gosh, now I've got to worm my way through behind the heater, you know, in the attic and see if I can find out if there's a structure under that, you know, that valley that's only, you know, it's this high, and I need to get through the insulation to see if there's something there. And then show it on the plans. Like what is being looked for in plan check or in inspections to look for?
Yeah, I don't know exactly, but what I've been experiencing is that the inspectors are reluctant to get into the attic. So they're trusting that you're doing what you said you're doing on the plans. And so the person who figures out who does the plans is somebody, potentially an architect, engineer, maybe a residential customer, but someone has to see if this works. And that person is, let's see, if it works, has to get into that space to figure that out. In my opinion, I don't know any other way to do it except to get into that awkward position of looking at that hip and trying to figure out where it's going.
Other point here on the prescriptive path is we have a form, right? It's a very streamlined, simplified process.
Yes.
So it's not a typical plan review that you're familiar with for things. So I imagine that this would be an update to that form, and there would need to be some site evaluation, Sarah, to verify that this is truly in place. And it's really an issue for just qualifying these older cut and stack roofs. I mean, that's what we're talking about, existing roofs. And so I think I see it as a form item for that simplified approach, prescriptive.
I could see, you know, on like the standard plan type forms, you know, checking a box or verifying it's there or providing basic lumber dimensions or something. But it would be nice to know what, I guess once the form is built, we'll know what's required, what we've got to collect when we're crawling through the attic.
Right.
Because I don't want to have to go back a second time.
Yeah. And just like Tony said, like the prescriptive, I mean, we have like a flat fee for that kind of thing, right? It's not going to be getting into the calculations of an in-depth plan review. It's sort of a faster track, basically, right? If those conditions meet it, which it's like, yeah. As opposed to, oh, now this is really like you were describing, more complex.
Yeah, the problem is if nobody checks, then we have the potential for failure at some point, so.
Yeah.
It's a two-part process.
First
Plan
to
review,
find the
inspection.
issue, and then two, to go in and build it.
Yep. And I think that's with other things on the form, right? Roof member spacing 24 on center, things like that. You're verifying that, you know, the building department is not out there saying, do you have roof members at 24 inch on the center? When you fill out the form and you sign it, you're saying, I have this brace to a bearing wall. I have these roof framing members at 24 on center. That's the whole intention of the form. And the form just uses code language. So it'd be very similar to what's on the screen there.
But you have to figure all this out before you can figure out your installation. You have to know how the roof is framed. You need to be able to convey that so we have the basis for what you determine that. So you need to know that information before you start your roof even laying it out.
There's
absolutely
when especially on smaller projects, you can set up that A-frame ladder and pop your head into the attic with a good flashlight and see the rafter spacing, at least in the area under your array, and go, yeah, it looks pretty clear, or what kind of support structure is there on that roof plane from the ladder. You don't have to, crawl across and try not to fall into the ceiling or anything, because I've seen that happen. But getting that hip support is going to, or verifying the hip support, which I agree we should do. I'm just putting it out there, this will add time and complexity to the typical site visit, because now you do have a human crawling through the attic in some fashion to get to that hip to verify that support, when previously they could have worked from the top of the ladder with a good flashlight and camera tape measure.
Typically, roofs are built in different eras. The roofs we're talking about are a certain era. You should know, I mean, you should develop that. You can figure this out really quickly if you know what you're looking at. And you have to know all this information anyways. You have to determine it. And again, you only have to look at the area that you're modifying. You don't need to go into a corner of the roof that you're not affecting. You need to look at where the area that you're modifying the loads.
I would say that this idea of structural support for array was already here without these qualifying questions and statements. And I appreciate that you may or may not have been looking at those things before, but it seems to me that to make sure that your array is sufficiently supported, that it would have been prudent to do that. And I'm not sure how much of this is really
You guys too.
influencing the work, because
Okay, bye.
I guess I'm leaning towards that this is just good practice, and the language of the code would assume this is already occurring, and we're talking about language that is now being identified as additional work for design and potentially construction. In my opinion, it should have already been occurring, because you want to support a PV array so it won't ruin an existing load system that was never intended to hold up PV. I mean, these are structures prior to truss ideas, and cut and stack roofs or color framing or whatever language you want to call this individual framing system was really done prescriptively. This is what we've always done. It's been working pretty well. And, you know, now we're going to put some PV on it. So maybe it's going to be heavier, and let's see if we can fit it into the old box called prescriptive. So I'm leaning towards the safety side, the certainty side, and making sure it's okay. And then I appreciate your feedback, Sarah, that this may be more work. And I'm hoping within a few installations, it will be just normal, and it's going to be painful to get there. So apologize for that.
Yeah, I think what would typically happen is somebody's going to do their standard, poke their head in, go, this, you know, the roof, the attic under the array looks good. And then they go back to the office, and then the designer puts together the plans and goes, oh, we're over the max span. We need to know the support under the hip. And the site tech is like, oh, there's a lot of junk in that attic. I've got to go back. Like, they may not have known that they needed to look at the hip support or valley support, because they didn't know that they were over the span, because the site tech is always the newest hire. They're the least experienced person on the team. So there's always a need for more training, but they don't necessarily know the span, you know, the span requirements as the site tech who has been tasked with taking measurements, you know. So I'm not saying we don't need to do this. I'm putting it out there that this will be a few extra truck rolls as people learn, especially since new hires are always those guys. Because you don't want them doing the installation. You don't want them doing the design. This is how they get their foot in the door, since we don't have grid alternatives and hands-on training here without the apprenticeship program. So they just
seems like having a checklist for them when they go out to the site would be a pretty, you know,
they
good way to get them, you know, so they know what it is they need to measure.
Yeah, they do. They do.
Well, now they'll have a picture that they can compare it to.
All right, any other committee discussion on this? We also have item number 1. So kind of just walking through the prescriptive installations, taking a look at that new proposed language, how that works with The proposals, public proposals, a lot of modifications there. It sounds like we're good with bearing wall. You know, it sounds like we're keeping that. Any other discussion on those portions of the code?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to take a quick look at what Amit had sent, and Amit had concern about if the roofs are higher than 40 feet, because then the numbers start to change. When he did his calcs, that was one thing that he had brought up to me and expressed some concern. And that it just be exposure B and C, which I think that's in there now. And then that it didn't apply in the special wind hazard areas, the gorge, the coast, and the other one that's inland. Because then he said the numbers may not work.
Yeah, so a couple of things. So I think Jeremy had quite a few conversations with Amit after those initial comments, and we added some things in this, the blue font. In particular, when we get to standing seam metal roofs and the loading to those clamps and the different configurations dealing with the spacing perpendicular to seams and along or parallel to those seams. And I believe my understanding is that he was on board with all of those things, and that maybe as we look towards potentially, taking provisions out of this and making them in the res code for specific to residential structures, maybe under the next ORSC process, or some other kind of work group process where, SEAO and maybe OSEA and, other stakeholders could kind of engage if we're going to narrow that existing scope for the prescriptive installations. So, all of a sudden putting up a 40-foot limit or modifying allowable wind or things like that, I think that it might be just a broader discussion, since I think there would be a lot of folks that would be interested in having some input in that.
I just want to point out that he did have some concerns about those issues. So
yeah, no, absolutely. I read the comments too, and Jeremy, maybe you could chime in on some of the points. And
yeah, so ASC 716 is the current reference standard in the OSSC for structural design loading provisions. And in that standard, there are new specific wind load pressure design calcs for these types of systems now, where they hadn't been as clear in the past. And the pressures are significantly higher when calculated now as compared in the past for these prescriptive applications. So that's the general concern that Amit brought up. And we share the same understanding of that, based on the previous or the first time these were written, there was an understanding of what the loads were. And so the tributary area calculated for each connection was assumed based on the maximum wind uplift pressure. So those have changed, but getting stakeholder input and involvement and SEAO, I think it's a little late. We do agree that it's late for this code cycle, unless the committee wants everybody to take a closer look. But it is going to require more eyes on the matter.
And we can absolutely do that. It's just one of those things, where if we're going to significantly alter the existing longstanding prescriptive path, then I think it's just need to be a bigger, more concentrated effort and discussion on that, which is completely fine. It's just timing of that. What do we do that now and possibly not have a 2022 OSSC at the anticipated date? Or do we do it kind of in the interim, look towards maybe interim amendments to the OSSC? And then remember, on the Resi side, we're doing a quick turn on that, which Laura is very excited about. We're going to have a 2023 res code. So any of that, Terry, I don't know if that's helpful, but I think we've tried to share those thoughts with Amit and also with Sarah as well, because there were other things there too, like the height, the allowable 18 inches, which I think plays it could have a significant impact on the industry. And so all of those things, I think, collectively would need to be discussed kind of on a broader level.
Also, just to point out that Amit wasn't even sure if he was conservatively capturing everything, just because there are so many variations, different things that can happen, with the roof lines and everything like that with the ASC 7 pressure calculation. So it's very difficult to capture quickly and correctly right now in the code.
Yeah, I would say probably my feeling is, maybe move along with this as what we've captured, but that maybe it's something we do as an interim, that we start that process. Because if we put it off, the same thing will happen again next time. We won't be ready to look at that and come up with making sure we're keeping everybody safe and keeping these things on the roof where they belong.
Yeah,
I'm going to lie with you, Terry. I also would caution that method, not because it's not prudent or because it's not certain. It's just that for whatever reason, when there's a concentrated effort like a new code coming out, there's a lot of people who are willing and able to help. And for some reason, when we go to this middle ground, this interim piece where, and I'm just speaking from my experience with what's happening in the board, is that the participation level for everything has gone down. It's fine on the administrative side, like BCD is really strong and SEAO will be really strong, but to getting the other people, the interest kind of wanes. And I mean, I'd really love to have Sarah part of that, and if she can continue to help, that would be great. It's just that for some reason or another, this target date of October 1st gets people motivated to do stuff. And when you take that pressure off, the people go, okay, we'll just wait, or sometimes they just disappear. I don't know. And it's just a gamble, right? I mean, I like it. I don't want this to hold up all the great things we've been doing on all the other sections. I think this is, a really good change for Oregon and all the other areas. And so balance wise, I think this one does need to either get in or get out, and move. I'm just hopeful that, if you guys want to attack it before the next meeting and get it done, I would love that. I would just really love that. So, but you're saying, Jeremy, maybe we don't even have the bigger picture right now to have all the people who are wanting to talk about this issue available.
Yeah, we'd have to see. I don't know if Eric Watson, are you available right now? I see you're on the call. I don't know if you're listening in right now, but we need SEAO involvement on this.
I am listening right now, but
okay. Just wanted to know, so scheduling and everything. I know SEAO has not weighed in specifically on these latest kind of looking in detail at the existing prescriptive provisions. I know this is more of a regulation or a building department regulation and industry practice that's not being looked at from the engineering side, but that the engineering SEAO was involved, I think, on the original testing and some of those
we definitely were involved in the original proposal. I don't know about the availability of meeting before the next meeting is next Thursday. That probably is not very doable. I know Seth is out right now, and I know Amit's not available, so I'm not sure about trying to get together a meeting to where we can address this in a week.
I don't think it's possible. I mean, this is a very complex problem. When it was originally created, ASC 7 didn't really even address any of what was being going on. So the advances in that are enormous, and it needs to be studied in depth before he just throws something out.
Thanks for all of that. And I think also the importance of, engaging OSEA and Sarah and having them at the table for those discussions, particularly if the result is going to, impact the industry significantly. So,
Mike, from your perspective, do you think that these changes are going to be commented on by I can't remember the letters you just mentioned. I'm sorry.
Well, the thing is, if we rush to it, we're going to be too conservative, and it's really going to probably not be practical. So I think we need to look at it where you can look at, see, a lot of these applications you may not even use. You know, how many of these prescriptive roofs are over 40 feet tall? Things like that. We really haven't looked at it, but if you look at just the pure numbers coming out of the code, they're looking at, originally ASC 7 didn't really deal with objects attached to a roof. They were dealing with the envelope of the roof. They've now done a lot more work on that, and there's a lot more information there that was never part of this when those original provisions were created. So I hate that if we rush to come up with something, the problem is you end up becoming conservative to make sure you address all the conditions. So I think it really needs to be studied and bringing in the shareholders, because there may be areas where you don't really even use it. So you have to really look at this more carefully. I think what we have now is a reasonable change.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm trying to find the boundary conditions of the study so that it can be attacked and understood, and then the schedule be pursued. And with your statement, is very good, and it has lots of additional thought for me, because I'm outside this industry and I'm outside this language. I'm just trying to find a way to move through it and try to apply it into the interface with the board. And I have, and Tony's talked about this already, you know, January 19th board meeting that we're working on. And I'm trying to, like, we have these committee meetings that are happening to get us ready for that. And, you know, there's administrative work that has to happen. I'm just doing the practical schedule problem issue here right now. And so trying to figure out what the boundary conditions of the study, for me, it's really important. And Mike, it sounds like you and Jeremy and the SEO and Sarah would be helpful to figure out what it is, what part of the turkey bone we're picking on, you know? And so it's kind of like, if you guys could define that, then we could figure out who needs to be at the table, and then we can figure out what the schedule is, and then we can figure out how it fits with the January 19th. And I do want it to be representative and not, you know, conservative, as you say, Mike, but I also don't want to miss the boat. I don't want it to drift out and not be solved. And if you say that ASEC, and I didn't know if those are the right letters, is not done with their review, then it's even going to be out further, right? So if they're done and they know what they're talking about and they say this is what the risks are, then there's someone who can represent that risk and talk to the industry and figure out how we get there, and then we can solve it. That's all I'm really trying to say, is trying to get the schedule to work.
Jeremy, I mean, I think this is something that's going to take a while to tackle.
Yeah, we were thinking probably more likely next code cycle, because I mean, this just came up. Just so you know, Eric, this just came up during review of Sarah's proposal language, and then a closer look at the OSISC folks at Amit and folks at the City of Portland and SEO staff are just now kind of starting to dig into this. I mean, this is very new, so. And just looking at kind of some general loading scenarios, it was just last week that people started looking at like what kind of loads we're looking at. So it'll take some time, and it'll probably be next code cycle before that fully gets vetted in my thought. But we were hoping, actually, I don't know if Tony mentioned, but the res code cycle, the next residential code, that would be the thought, is that if SEO and the other stakeholders, OSEA, could all get engaged, collaborate on these provisions specific to the res code path, that all of the res code provisions here could get taken out of 31, and the res code no longer point to 31. And then the res board could kind of look at those provisions specifically for the next res code cycle. And then in the next OSSC, we would, you know, errata would take these out of the OSSC at that time, and then the next OSSC cycle, the commercial provisions would get updated.
Oh, I like that. That's very nice. That's a beautiful schedule. I love it.
Yeah. If we could look at it closely when we move it into the residential and make it work. So, and at that point, if we find any glaring problems, you know, it might be that you need to do something mid-cycle at that point to the commercial, just to correct anything that's found that's glaring during that, moving it into the res. But do a thorough review when we move it into the res. That would be my recommendation.
So we can capture, some notes on this discussion under this matrix item, and then I think all the parties that would want to be involved, it would be outside, independent of kind of the BCD and what we do. It take form of a public proposal, right, to modify existing amendments, and that could absolutely occur, through the res process, and that's going to be kicking off sometime before the end of next year. And so just to have that on everyone's, schedule, so we can note it in the matrix for this process as we talk through this with the governing advisory board, if that works for everybody.
Much more relaxed, Tony. Thank you. Appreciate that direction.
Great. Thanks for all of that. And for all of the dialogue there back and forth. We did do some slight editorial amendments. All the blue, we've shared this language with Amit, with SEAO, and with Sarah as well, as we kind of work through these things. So not a lot of technical changes down here specific to standing seam. There is a technical change somewhat in 2.2, and it is, if Laura could just scroll down, yep, right there. So you'll see here, Jeremy can talk through it, so I don't put my foot in my mouth on anything, but there is a little bit of a technical change.
So this goes in tandem with Sarah's proposal, is it 22-18? And she can weigh in on that proposal. But the intent of that proposal was to maybe provide more flexibility for clamp spacing perpendicular to seams. Under the OSISC, there did not appear to be a specific mandated maximum spacing perpendicular to seams. And when that was pulled into the 14 OSSC, I believe our engineering staff at BCD at the time and SCAO or City of Portland, I'm not sure, confirmed that it should have been codified that the clamp spacing perpendicular to seams should not exceed 24 inches. And the intent, I believe, was to make sure that the tributary area to a clamp was not being overloaded. And so that would put it at, because if you look up at 2.1, we limit the clamp spacing parallel to seams or along a seam to 5 feet. So 5 feet times the 2 feet puts it at 10 square feet of loading. So to provide more flexibility here, the 2.1 language now allows clamp spacing along the seam to, it's the first sentence in 2.2, to 60 inches. So you can go up 24 to 60 inches. So we put a cap at 24. That makes sure you don't get too many clamps along the seam so that you don't rip the seam off the sheathing. And that aligns with the OSISC original language. So it's 24 to 60 along the seam, and then perpendicular, this next sentence captures so that you don't exceed the 10 square feet. So it gives more flexibility on skipping seams for that clamping perpendicular to the seams. So I think that aligns with the original intent of capturing maximum tributary area, and also helps with Sarah's OSSC 22-18 proposal intent of industry concerns with limiting the perpendicular to seam attachments.
Yeah. Jeremy, thank you. I read that proposal 2 or 3 times this morning and could not make heads or tails because it seemed like it was repeating a few things. This is crystal clear to me how this should be approached.
And then likely this would all get probably modified in the next, like we talked about earlier, based on ASC 716 pressure, but same intent here. But this does not, so the idea here that nothing has changed as far as code cited, what's allowed as far as, tributary, it still gives the industry the same square footage, same wind speed allowances, same exposure. Nothing's changed in this whole section for the industry that we're aware of, except for those verifying of rafters and valleys.
Yeah, this language makes it clearer, less confusing.
Yes.
To me. Tiny edit after 75 pounds and 2.1, we need a period.
Thank you, Laura.
Any other committee thoughts, discussions on the overall prescriptive path? We have that new figure from Amit there included. We have some new language there in blue, some slight tweaks on some language to just add clarification, but overall, not a lot of technical changes to that path.
Good work.
Yeah.
Thumbs up. Saw a couple. Great.
All this through Thanksgiving break. Way to go, guys.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. So we're almost at 12:30, and this next discussion might be a big one. So I don't know if it's at the pleasure of the committee. Do we feel like taking a short break before going through kind of solar ready, the basis of it, the language for it, or do we want to just go right through? We can do. It's at the pleasure of the committee.
Harry, it's just a Thursday, 12:45 to 1:45 day.
I don't have any meetings, so I'm game to work through if people want to, and we can get her done.
Yeah, I'd be okay with that.
Good. We're just going through it. All right, here we go. So what you see before you is the proposal for solar ready construction. Remember, we discussed this with prior SEAO proposals in chapter 16. And so we made those I think that those proposals were relisted in your matrix under this since they would cross-reference them. But we already made those changes in chapter 16. And what we're doing here is we are aligning with Executive Order 17-20. And that's what we're doing here. And it's only for commercial structures. So this only would be applicable to structures governed by the OSSC. So not detached 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhouses. On the call or on the meeting with us, we have our energy code gurus, Kelly Thomas and Mark Heiser, in case I need them or in case the committee has any questions for them. I think it's a pretty straightforward, kind of dialed in path. You see some new definitions, which Laura has captured in our chapter 2, and you see the legend. So the 2021 IECC Appendix CB was used as the basis. The pink underline language that you see is that 21 IECC language. The blue underline are the proposed Oregon modifications. And essentially all of, just as we know of most of 3111, it'll be an amendment in its entirety. We do have the roof loads and documentation section that was tying back to that SEAO proposal with using the term collateral dead load there. And then I'll just give the committee some time to look it over and turn it over to all of you for discussion. Thank you.
Is it possible to scroll down so we can see it's at the bottom? Yeah, thank you.
Is that dual poled circuit breaker aligned with an amp size somewhere else? I think it's 4.5 maybe. In the right column on the top. 4.7, sorry.
It is not, since it's just reserving space. And then we wouldn't specify anything that has to do with amp sizing or anything here, right? That would be all the electrical and elevator board. But so the intention is just the space.
So it's allowing that to come in at some point, and you just make sure that never gets filled with some other circuit breaker.
Right. Yeah. It's a post occupancy consideration at that point, you know, and so I think the labeling is intended to address that, Mr. Sandoval. And yeah, and then we'd follow the electrical code and whatever would be required for that system.
And the conduit gets you from the panel up into the attic.
One thing to clarify here is the interconnection pathway and termination. So the construction documents for the zone shall indicate pathways for routing of conduit or piping sized in accordance with the electrical code from the zone to the panel or other approved location, providing flexibility approved by Terry or Elizabeth.
So it's not actually installing the conduit, it's just indicating how they could get it there. Or is it saying that it actually is installed?
I don't think there's a requirement to actually install the conduit. It's indicating the pathways for routing of that conduit and then sizing according to what would need to be sized, right? So we want to make sure that that pathway is there.
And then can you scroll down to 3111.4.2 so I can see all of what's required? Yeah, thank you. Locations.
We've got 2 E's there. A, B, C, D, E, E. So I have a really terrible marker drawing that I'd like to share with everybody, if you don't mind terribly. It's lower tech than I'd like, but so with the requirement that it be 80 feet minimum, 80 square feet minimum with a 5-foot minimum dimension, what I've drawn here is 5 feet by 16 feet for our 80 square feet minimum. Most modules that are readily available that most installers are using today are 66 inches long and 40 inches wide. So if you take your 66-inch module and stand it, put it in portrait in your 5-foot by 16-foot box, you're creeping out of it, which is probably fine in most cases, unless you've got a builder who gave you your 80 square feet exactly, and you cannot step outside of it because they put so much other stuff on the roof. Today, as we are now with our industry now, we don't really have convenient equipment to fit into that 5-foot dimension. If we were to lay them sideways, landscape, then in our 5-foot by 16-foot box, we can get like 2 3/4 modules basically. So again, that doesn't matter if it's not really the only footprint available for solar, but if your builder is just trying to do the cheapest bare minimum and bare minimum compliance, you're either going to get 2 modules or 0 modules in that 5-foot minimum dimension box, 80 square foot minimum footprint. And modules keep getting bigger. So I don't want to say, oh, well, we just need 5.5 feet and then we'll be good, because manufacturing, all the math behind manufacturing, they just keep making these modules bigger and bigger. And it's frustrating to installers too, because we've got to carry those things up to the roof. We've got to fit them on roof facets that are tricky and complicated. So on older homes, we don't like having large modules, but, and I complain to them, but who am I? They don't care. So we just have these giant modules that right now we wouldn't be able to fit into a 5-foot minimum, 80 square foot minimum footprint unless it was just a symbolic 2-module cute system. Like, look at us, we care, you know, and you spend more on wiring and labor than you do on the equipment, and you get zero payback, basically. It's so tiny. So I don't know what the perfect solution is. I don't know if we just say, give us 6 feet, and in 3 years, we'll revisit this and see if modules have changed much, or maybe we found the sweet spot and this is where modules are going to stay for a while.
And Tony, how does this all work with green roofs? Because in our planning world, they're requiring green roofs or ways to deal with that, and trying to get space for a green roof and then get your solar spaces also. It becomes a challenge.
Yeah, great question. So first, before getting to that, Terry, to Sarah's point, Mark Heiser and Kelly Thomas are on the meeting, so they could chime in. I think, you know, at the pleasure of the committee, if you wanted to change that minimum dimension to 6 feet, based on, you know, your industry experience, I think we could do that kind of on the fly even here. So back to the vegetative roofs and the green roofs. So I guess we go up to the scope of the section, just in the charging. And there is some flexibility in the charging in 3111.4. So where it applies initially, newly constructed buildings shall be provided with this zone complying with the entire section. Exceptions, group U, building with, yeah, and also potentially number 3, depending on where you're at. But number 4, yep, number 4 specifically talks about it, and it would be something documented by a registered design professional, and then submitted to you, Terry.
The prioritization then is that the solar ready zone is less of a priority in this language than the vegetative roof area, skylights, and rooftop equipment. Obviously, the rooftop equipment we need to make the building work. Structural configuration we need to make so the other 3, skylights, vegetative, and obstructions, are a priority over the solar ready construction.
Yeah, somebody at some point has to make a decision on whether they want the solar or they want the vegetated roof, because it's hard to get them both. Jody, does that work for you in plan review?
Yeah, I mean, as long as we have that understanding that if somebody covers the thing with a vegetative roof, they've basically exempted themselves from needing a solar ready zone. It doesn't have to be like required by some other group, because of course building code doesn't require vegetative roofs, but certainly in Portland they're heavily incentivized. So as long as that is, that is definitely workable, and it will make the planning and zoning folks happy. They have tried to incentivize both solar and vegetative roofs by letting the vegetative roofs be underneath the solar panels. But, and I think we've talked to VCD about what we see as problems with this, but it really seems like a difficult move based on the way the code language is in other parts in chapter 15.
And also, you know, when you reference back to the section regarding the rooftop gardens and, you know, how they require the separation from the combustible materials, which is what our issue that, as Jody was alluding to, and I think Terry as well, that we're seeing they've been putting the panels above what they're calling a green roof or vegetative roof. And there's, you know, the code regarding the rooftop gardens says, you know, you have to show that it meets a Class A rating on whatever's above it, you know, if it's within that 6 feet, and that's also been an issue. So
They both seem like good things, green things to do. But anyway, in terms of answering your question, Terry, yes, this exemption does work.
Can we go back to the, the requirements there? So item C says that on the submitted documents, we need to include the junction boxes with the interconnections, pathways, and termination. It sounds like they really are wanting a little bit more than just showing that we have a designated pathway. If you're actually starting to show where junction boxes are going in there, I'm a little unclear, because that, when I read that, it makes me think that maybe they do want some of this actually installed at the time of the design. I mean, where junction boxes need to go along the route of the pathway really is kind of in the hands of the electrician and the electrical code in terms of how many bends they can put in the wire right before they need another pull box or junction box.
Sure. So with that, I'd like to invite Mr. Mark Heiser from our team to chime in. I think he's standing by, ready and excited to talk about pathways and junction boxes.
It's not duct work. I thought Mark just talked about duct work.
Maybe he's on a delay.
Sorry about that. Mike was muted. Just needed to turn it off for a second. And if we can scroll up just a little bit more to get to the beginning point on this. And again, it's about construction document. Scroll. So 3111.4.2, and it's the document requirements shall indicate all of the following. So if you're indicating where you'd put those, so that's the start point here. And I'm trying to remember whether this included having to, since you don't know the size involved here, I don't believe this. It's been a while since I've been in the commercial portion. Residential, we are requiring the actual, not just a pathway, but installation of conduit from point A to point B. But this is just an indication of how to get from A to B under 3411.4.2. Is
right, but
the reading that I've had on it.
As the architect or the designers, the specific location of junction boxes is kind of outside of what we would normally see in something like this. I understand the pathway, but you're kind of drilling down into pretty specific information in there.
Same as a plans examiner, as a plans examiner, it's like, okay, looks good. This is very interesting. It really speaks of planning provisions, in my opinion, as, like when you would do a pre-app with an applicant, as well as it kind of crosses into the electrical code. It's weird that it's different than the residential if we're trying to be consistent with these types of things.
It would be much more helpful to have like a stubbed off conduit, but even then, if you have the wrong size conduit, you're still in trouble. But as a designer, I'd be really annoyed if they said, well, we put the junction box here when we built the building, and I want it at the opposite corner because that's the better way to string it, that, whatever the equipment is at the time, it makes more sense to put it elsewhere. It'd be kind of just like, oh, that's dumb. I don't know if it helps anybody to have a junction box put in place before the solar equipment's been determined on commercial.
And just to the committee, the model code IECC commercial ready, again, which we brought in, and is that section CB 103.6 is about the interconnection pathway, states that the construction documents shall indicate pathways for routing of conduit or piping from the solar ready zone to the electrical service panel and the electrical energy storage system now in the 2021, or service hot water system. So they want to be able to know that, yes, you have considered, just to the design team, that they've considered where it's going to be. There have been times in the past where back in green codes where you'd say also, sort of spray paint on the floor, here's where the panel is going to go, and making sure you have access space in front of it. So from the model code is really showing the path, making sure they have considered a pathway from the solar ready zone to the panel.
And I fully understand and support, yes, we should be showing where that can go, but the junction boxes really feels out of place to me, that you're really drilling down into the design of that path more so than I think you really intend.
So Eric, I think what you're saying is just get rid of C, but keep B, which is show the pathway.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
Agree.
Yeah, we're not gonna.
Did Mark, did you say that you don't have to install the junction boxes? That this was originally intended just to say, show me where they would be if we were installing them?
Yes,
Okay.
just following along with model code, just trying to bring it in. And I'm trying to remember which organization was asking to actually show in earlier work with solar stakeholders, and also with the electrical code people on why C was brought in. I do not recall or remember exactly when or how and which organization put it in, but they wanted to be able to say, yes, we know where that termination point is and make sure there's space for the termination point, I believe was why that came in.
Yeah, okay, I agree with the committee as well then, because without the word like future junction boxes or future whatever, then I would have assumed as a plans examiner that I was looking for where they were about to put these in, not just where they would maybe one day put them in. The pathway certainly makes sense. You need the space, but anything you don't want to be installed right now, but you do want to see on the drawings somehow, I would recommend using modifying term like future or something like that to clarify.
Jody and Mark and Eric, I see the language of construction documents and I think installation. And so I'm trying to figure out what installation. And so I think we're installing a solar ready zone. So now we've created a space that's ready for solar. And it's very unusual in the language of construction documents to do this. So typically those are called diagrams, not that I need to get into the semantics of this because you're, as you said, Mark, it's national language. But it does infer that something will be constructed, and not that we can't construct a solar ready zone. It just seems like there isn't necessarily a prescribed configuration, so it's left to the designer to determine what that looks like. And maybe as designers we need to figure out what's a normal method to do that, and there's some help here in the prescription about what that looks like. I don't even know why I said all that stuff. It's just, there's no action for me. There's no consequence to my comments. It's just a quandary, I suppose.
Yeah, to me, it just feels like clarification that, especially item B there, that is future, because otherwise you're saying construction documents for solar ready zones shall indicate, and I'll take out all of the following, shall indicate the interconnection pathway and termination in accordance with section 3111.4.6. So if I read that as just one sentence. It's telling me that the documents are showing you where the pathway is getting installed.
Yeah, I think
So I
there's
think
there's a line that says interconnecting pathway here, termination here. And then somehow you define what the interconnection pathway is, because the contract is, how big is it? Or I don't know what the termination looks like, where can we give you some more definition? I'm gonna give you an RFI, and then you have to figure out what that looks like and say, this meets my intention. And I don't know.
So the question I would have, Mark, is the item E, the structural design loads for the roof load and roof. Does that mean that the structural part does need to be built as part of this? Or are they just showing?
No.
No, it's included.
It's
I think
included,
that's the
yes.
big piece here, is
Right.
to make the building ready, solar ready. Then
Right.
the big piece here is that collateral 5 PSF dead.
So that's where I think it becomes important that each of these, if it's just being shown or if they're actually having to build it that way, would be good to have that clarification.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it's getting so into the, this should just really be about, you got to have this space and you got to make the building ready to add that weight. But to get into like even the fire access and all that, obviously they're going to, when they're ready, they'll pull a separate permit, right? To add that, the solar on there. And that's when you would get into all those more details of how it meets code then. So it just has a foot in a lot of different areas, and it feels very awkward as a plans examiner to me.
Yeah, because I was gonna say
further. This,
Yeah.
like, and Elizabeth, you're talking about this thing. Let's just say we design the structural design load for today, 2022 OSSC, and they install it 10 years from now. I'm not saying they would, but let's just say they do. Would the prescription of the design load that was valid in 2022 be appropriate? And we've used that argument in the past for seismic and vertical loads that say, we designed it for an H5 or an H occupancy because of 1.5 back when it was built, X time, 2014 OSSC, was valid. And therefore we don't have to do a seismic upgrade because the loads today, 10 years later, are different. It's nice because it puts the foothold of the structural design load today into the code and gives you authority as designer and plans examiner and owner that we met the code when we designed it to beat these dead loads, and the dead loads that we're assigning are XYZ, and we're showing them on the plan. So if the new work 10 years from now met all those dead loads and live loads, we're good to go.
So that, to take that out of the structural realm, but more to the clearance, that pathway around it. If we designed it to meet today's requirements for the location of the panels and the pathways around it, and they 10 years from now go to install the panels, and that pathway around it requirement has gone from 3 feet to 5 feet,
Right.
we would still be able to do it within the 3 feet because that's what we designed it to at the time it was permitted. I mean, would that logic follow through?
Well, I don't know, as a plans examiner, then you're like, okay, now I got to go back to this code and this code back there. I don't know. It
Yeah, I agree.
makes it complex.
Yeah, and that's part of the issue with trying to design based on
feature.
planning assumptions that
Right.
may or may not still be applicable when the work happens.
Right.
If they don't show fire access today, then you won't be able to verify that it's even code compliant right now. And it may be, within those 3 feet right now. And then it's like, great, you have a solar ready zone. You want to build it next year. Oh, you're already out of compliance. And so I feel like at the very least, they should show the bare minimum pathways today.
Absolutely agreed.
I
my
agree.
point was if the pathway requirements change, if that minimum pathway requirement grows, but we designed, we designed it to what would be code complying today, but they install the system 5 years from now and that pathway has widened. But now we don't have room to have that wider path. How do we address that at that point?
I would just give you an example of work I did in California on a project where the building was built 4 years earlier, and we were coming in. There's language within the California code that allows a 2-year code cycle to be ignored if you met the requirements at the time 2 code cycles before. They actually used they use 6 years as an example. So meaning that they won't go all the way back to the world's end, but they will give you back at least 2 code cycles to say, and it doesn't even say which code it was, just says, 2 code cycles. So you could be there anytime you wanted to. The code could be adopted anytime, 2022, 2026, whatever. And you only go back 2 years each time, or 2 code cycles each time. And that allows this window of forgiveness or mercy in the code language. And potentially with these future ideas, maybe we need to figure out what that window is. Is it 1 code cycle? Is it 5 years? I mean, I've used 10 and people are going like, whatever, Sandoval, I don't know. But 5 years, it's Bressman's 5 years. I like that. I think that's a nice number. And it seems like we should be able to capture this thought within this 5-year period. It should work.
So a couple of things real quick here. So all this is intending to do is to show that you meet the solar ready zone size requirement under the codes today. We don't know what the code's going to be in 10 years from now. And when you go to pull the permit for whatever the code is from 10 years from now in that example, you're going to meet whatever code is required at the time. That what's in place, what's effective. But all this is basically just saying is that when you qualify the size that's required of the zone under 3111.4.3, that you have to consider those things like pathways and all of the stuff that's in place as you identify that zone today. It has nothing to do with requiring you to place something there in the future. You may never place something there in the future. You may place something there next week and maybe in 10 years, but there's not going to be I don't think there's going to be a grace period or some type of tie to when the solar ready zone was identified.
Right.
I don't see that as being a linear code application.
Thank you.
It seems to me if you use 2022, OSSC as a start date, I would think that the simple solution is to go to Eric's question. If the building's built under the 2022 code and they don't actually put the solar up for 4 more years, that it would be as simple. And if there are some changes to the code, like the pathways, it would seem like it would be as simple as appealing to go back to the year of the approved, that they utilize 3111.4.2 or 3111.4. It would be as simple as that. Just like almost like anything else, when we're looking at a structure, under the code that it was built at, this is a little bit different because you're going to put something new on top of it. But I would think that it would be as easy as appealing to go back to the code for which the solar zone was approved, the solar ready zone was approved.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what Tony's getting at. That's the current code, but that's an alternate means or method, which we can always have the right to do. Portland's got a really easy process set up for people to do that, or at least ask to do it. But yeah.
I think it's the important piece, right? Is just qualifying that zone and showing it, right? I mean, I think that's what we're getting at here.
Yeah.
There's no requirement to even use the zone.
Right.
And the pathways have been the same they've been the same for 11 years now. So
okay,
maybe they don't change in the next couple.
Yeah, the only question I have is that 4.2 is construction documents are required to show, which means that they're still having to show the structural design that it was designed to what it was designed to. But I just want, because we're actually saying they have to build that. It's more than just showing that one, correct? And do we need anything, a pointer on that that says, this one, you need to do more than just show it on your plans, you need to build it.
Yeah, so really good question. So I think we could look at those items, A, B, now we have A, B, C, D, and E. We can look at the language there, but we can go over to the 3111.3.4. So that's where the actual, or 4.5, excuse me, that's where the actual structural design, the collateral dead load is required.
Okay.
And then remember those 2 pointers in chapter 16, which were part of that SEAO proposal. So we can also open 16 and look at that language, but it says, shall include yada, yada. And then 4 or 5 says shall include in your gravity incisement.
Yeah, I'm okay with it if we just think, I just want to verify that we think we've got it. So it's good enough pointers on that. I think that's fine.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's a good point. Laura, could you show 4.5 here? And then could we pull up chapter 16 quickly and take a look at those pieces in chapter 16?
Yeah, and as part of that, if somebody was doing a different type of system, they need to do one that 5 pounds is appropriate for. But if that number changed in the future, then they may have to make modifications to what kind of solar system they put on there. And that's part of what we were discussing. I think that makes total sense.
And I don't see, hopefully Laura can hear us. Hopefully she didn't drop off or something. But if we could get up, oh, there we go. It's good to go. So the first one occurs, I think it's in 1604, and then we have 1613.
What do you want me to show?
Oh, sorry. So the pointers in chapter 16. Yep. There you go. Are required to be provided with a solar ready zone. A collateral dead load shall be included in the design. So those are your structural design requirements. And then back in that 3111, we have it in 4.5.
Yeah. I think that looks good.
In the other lettered items, I think the committee was coming to a consensus that we should use, I think Mr. Bressman brought it up, like future. So the future or potential interconnection pathway and termination locations. Would that be?
Yeah, I think that'd be good.
Okay. Do we have a preference there? The future, does that work? I think we use that, in the labeling requirement reserved for future solar. So that would be very similar.
Or do we want to even go further and say for potential future? So it's real plain that it's not required.
Yeah, the potential future interconnection pathway.
Yeah.
Wink,
I don't know if we need potential, because right now we've got a lot, we've put in, new panels that have the breaker marked future solar, and we don't, they may use it, they may not use it, but we know it's for potential future solar, and it just says future.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is on those, when it's built, it'll be there, but the following year, they may need a spot for something else that they're putting into the building and may take it.
Right.
If we've labeled it on the drawings, then everybody knows that they need to stay out of there.
Nobody looks at the drawings the next year when they pull an electrical permit for who knows what, the dog wash station they're putting in.
So can we require that they paint a pretty diagram on the roof saying this is
right? I was going to say, what's the label? What's the inspection process? The inspector's going to be like, yeah, okay, cool, looks good.
Yeah, somebody needs a new mechanical unit, it goes right in the middle of that.
Got this nice clear space.
Yeah. Oh, and it was designed to hold a load too.
Wait
Hey.
a minute. I have to circle back. You said nobody looks at the drawings, then how come we have to put everything on the drawings? If nobody looks at them.
Well, if they wanted to put solar, then they would, because they would bring those drawings in and say, look, it's all designed and ready to go. But I'm just saying, it may not stay that way.
Yeah.
He didn't
no,
mean
I-
us plan reviewers, by the way.
Yeah. Me?
And
I would
Eric,
just-
those drawings you gave us are exactly the way it was built, right? No updates,
Without
no
a
changes.
without a single
Mhm.
change.
No changes.
Every nail in its exact place.
And just to be consistent with this future interconnection, I'd like to modify C to include future firefighter access. So
Yeah.
just right in front of firefighter, just put future.
I do think that's actually a little bit of a good question. Is it the intent that this solar ready zone would be maintained for the life of the building? That this is something that as plans examiners, we should be trying to, or asking the architect to identify previous solar ready zones, because these requirements are only for new buildings in the scoping. So do we, I don't know. I just, if we want to meet the intent of the statutory requirement or wherever this is coming from, what's our burden on us or on the designers for the life of the building?
And one way we could do that, Jody, is in the charging statement, we could just say previously designated solar zones and just make the charging statement not only new buildings, but also previously designated.
Yeah, I think that's a good question for Tony in building codes. I mean, how was this charge for us put there? Is it just when they build it that it's got to be there, but then in the future it can go away?
Yeah, doesn't this come from an executive order, or what's that order say?
Statute or
Statute, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So it came from Executive Order 17-20.
Okay.
As far as what as soon as we start talking about maintenance and
Mhm.
post C of O configurations, as you all know, I mean, it becomes,
Fire.
yeah, well, then it's all, and it's also just kind of like all bets are off. Like, what are we, Terry says there's not even drawings to look at, there's all sorts of different things going on. So I don't know. I don't know what the intention is, as we move away from just the initial requirement. You have to provide this structural design, but maybe Mark Heiser from our team can jump on here. The requirement is, as I understand it from the executive order, is that it is to require that new construction, commercial buildings are solar ready. There's nothing about
Yeah,
maintenance of
yes.
that. Anything like that.
Yes, Tony, yeah, the requirement is that conduct amendments of the state building code to require all newly constructed buildings will be ready for the installation of solar panels and related technologies by October 1st, 2020 for residential and October 1st, 2022 for commercial structures. BCD may establish limited specific exemptions to the solar ready policy for buildings where solar applications are infeasible. So that was our directive, to sort of create a solar ready, and that's really the language that's in the model code. Let's see here, on between pages 4 and 5, item 4A. Yes, Laura's doing a great job bringing that up.
Mhm.
So this is a great point. It's something you might see coming up at the national level, is them doing something in the IEBC, coming in and saying, solar ready zone shall not be impeded on, or something like that. But since it's currently was it an appendix to the energy code, it might even go there as far as in. But the language isn't there right now. The intent is to really get buildings constructed now, and hopefully people not filling it in and but yes, as Tony noted, the future use of the building isn't always.
Can
seen,
Maybe-
but something might come in the IEBC sort of.
Can I throw out a thought on this? Is it possible that between now and our next meeting, I hate to put it off, but our next meeting, we're going to be addressing chapter 34 and the existing building code. If this isn't an issue that really sort of belongs in that conversation, that maybe there's language somewhere in there that addresses how designers and reviewers have to deal with buildings that did have solar ready provisions when they come back in for renovations. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me, Eric.
Yeah, I the way I see this all now, that it just says you have to have it there when they build it, but I don't see anything that says you need to keep it. But if they want to keep it, I think you're right, Eric. It would probably be chapter 34. It just need to be a statement in there somewhere.
You don't think under 3111.4.3, just a statement that says solar ready zone shall be maintained would be an adequate statement to make? Because I can see a mechanical permit coming in for a 8-ton RTU, and it's one page with the cut sheet, and they'll show their stuff, it'll get approved, right? I mean, unless somebody's going to do all the work to dig in and find all this out, at least if it's noted, if they have to change it later on down the line, if there is some, they've put it up or whatever. I mean, it's just pretty standard kind of statement.
Yeah, I think the statement you're saying there, Paul, would be able to be placed in there. I think it's not our statutory capability to put it in there because we can't maintain things. So it even though the sentence sounds right, I don't think it works for our ability to manage a building over time. We're only allowed to work on new construction. So, I mean, and we've already seen in the obstruction piece that we talked about earlier, there's a higher priority given to pipes, mechanical exhaust vents, ducts, HVAC. I mean, there's all these other areas that get to be in front of solar ready.
Since the language has us reserving electrical space in the panel, we're reserving that space. It's not just build it, label it, and walk away, but reserve it. Shouldn't we be reserving the rooftop space as well?
I think the answer to that is yes. For me, it's how.
Yeah.
I mean, if you put it on architecturally, we're going to show it on our roof plan, and probably mechanical is going to show it on their roof plan. But as Mr. Jennings said, if somebody comes in a year or two after the building is built and pulls a mechanical permit to put a new unit up on the roof, they're in all likelihood not even going to have our original roof plan or the mechanical roof plan. They're going to have just their own one-page drawing. And the fact that area has been noted as reserved, I don't know that anybody's going to know that when they come in for a permit.
In that scenario, would there be a way to have, the simple checkbox, the one-page application that says, is this in the solar ready zone, or what was the year the building was built, or what code cycle, or some quick way to force people to check real quick? Do you know where the solar ready zone is? Is there a solar ready zone? Kind of I don't know the best language.
See, these could be a standalone mechanical or electrical permit easily, is most likely what it'll be, actually. Yeah, I don't know how you do that.
It ends up being the responsibility of the building owner, because there may not even be, we're talking about construction documents potentially being created by architects, engineers, but when you come in for these individual permits on equipment, they may not even be done by licensed professionals, that they may be done by installers, so contractors.
It seems like we kind of need a little bit more clarification on the executive order. If the intent is that that zone be maintained for the life of the building, because if it's just at the time of initial construction, then all of this is sort of moot. But if the intent is that, yes, that has to be maintained, then I think some adjustment needs to be made. And I don't know if it's in this section or in chapter 34.
And it's probably a question for the state attorney, not for even building codes division.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Tony can make that decision, but that's
Yeah.
where I'm thinking it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, as far as maintenance goes and the intention of the executive order and things like that, definitely outside the scope of, what we're doing here,
Right.
the technical stuff. So maybe we can just look at the technical language, and then we can chase down any like legal authority questions outside of this process.
I'm okay with the way I think adding the little bit that we were adding to make it clear that some of it's just for future, that the structural part isn't. I think we kind of got what we were after. There.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the intention is pretty clear. It's like to incentivize, hey, put solar there, do it now. But there's so many things that happen after a building has gotten its C of O that we cannot ever, they could knock a hole through a firewall and we wouldn't know it. So it is what it is.
It's a matter of trust with the building owner, I
Right.
believe.
It's outside of our liability or whatever, our control.
Yeah.
It's the fire department's issue now.
I was going to say,
I
that's
love
when
to say
Paul
that.
shows up. Paul and David show up. Okay, so a couple of things. So we have this language here. It's a mix of what we have at the model code level to turn to, right? This is kind of what I believe is in the residential voluntary reach code. Currently, it was where the 21 ORSC started. Similar, right? Similar appendix on the IRC side for solar ready. On the ORSC, where we're at currently is just the pathway, right? So that's what's required to facilitate the future addition of solar PV, whereas this one is the actual design of the zone. Sounds like we need to note on the matrix, maybe mention to the advisory board about the questions about maintenance of it in the future, things completely post C of O outside the control of the building department or even the design professional. Any other questions on this or any other comments from the committee on the proposed approach?
I think the approach is good, Tony. I'd just like to be consistent on the potential future and just making those the same. And I'm leaning towards taking out potential because I would like to have a little bit harder strength in the word, and by potential it kind of weakens, in my opinion, the whole intention of it. So I don't mean to be disrespectful, Terry, but I just would like to remove.
That's all right.
potential.
I don't have any heartburn either way.
Okay, cool.
One thing down in 311144 obstructions, I would love to see the service access setback language added, just in the list of like, shall not be limited to, of course, but pipes, mechanical, all the equipment and required service setbacks or access setbacks. If we've got to have 30 inches around the HVAC system, I don't want those 30 inches to be in that zone,
Thank you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That does. Good call.
Let's see, what would be nice language? Mechanical equipment clearance or required equipment clearances.
Probably just general equipment clearances, required equipment clearances.
How does that look?
I like it.
All right. Awesome. Any other comments? We also have the definitions, the associated definitions. I think one's for the total solar resource, and then as well as the solar ready zone in chapter 2. Yeah, so there's that new solar ready zone definition, and then also the total solar resource, which has to do with the initial exceptions.
Sarah, that definition's aligned with your added language for equipment clearance.
Okay.
All right. Anything else on the?
That looks good, Tony.
Okay. So that's backing up to our matrix. That is item 3111.4. Are we good to go as modified? And modified on the fly?
Yeah, with lots of discussion.
I need my 6 feet instead of 5 feet, please.
Oh yeah, 6 feet. Yeah, and the 5 feet there, as indicated by pink, it's just model. So it's just what's in the National Model Code.
Are we okay just changing it to 6? It seems like that would be more in line with industry, kind of their standard modules. I don't know that there's anything magic about it.
No, I think it's, yeah. Based on Sarah's input, it seemed like that needed to be 6.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
If there's any problems, we'll just point at her.
Hey, I did it.
Could have been 7, but
Oh, I'll be back. I'm going to ask for bigger ones next time. They make giant modules that are like commercial rated that are like 7.5 feet long, but you have a solar ready zone that doesn't allow that. You just have to get the ones that are better for residential and suck it up. You've got a tiny solar ready zone, 6 feet. I mean, we could go to 8 feet. I like 8 feet. That's all modules.
anything else here on this one?
We ready to vote? I'm good.
All right, look at that. Thumbs up all around. All right, thanks for that. And thanks for all the work on that on the fly. Really good stuff. So next we move to 31-7, temporary special event structures. These are existing Oregon amendments in chapter 31 that we're all familiar with. The requirements there. Got a thumbs up.
Not sure I've ever done one.
Yeah. I know Terry has.
I don't know that all these show up to us, to be truthful. But,
that's true.
Oh, man, to try and do that for every event that goes on.
I know.
I think it's something we're going to have to look at, though.
So thank you for that. It didn't seem like there was any opposition to maintaining those existing amendments. We have 31-15. This is new model code language, and way overdue, if you ask me. But it's shipping containers, and it really just provides a good general kind of overview of what you need to do if you're trying to use an intermodal shipping container. So model language with some slight modifications just for alignment with the OSSC. I'll turn it over to you, committee, for this.
I think it's model code. I don't know that I have any.
Yeah. I'm not going to challenge any of that. I wouldn't know I wouldn't even know where to begin. Yeah, it seems like this is one of those areas that until these have been around for a while and you see a bunch of them, designs coming in, and you guys have to review them and you start seeing what potential issues there are, then maybe in a code cycle or two, come back and make modifications. But clearly at the national level, they've spent a lot of time looking at this.
Yeah, I think everybody saw a need for it. Yeah. Need something in place. It may get modified over time, but I think right now it's a good start.
And believe it wasn't a standard first, Terry. Do you remember that? Wasn't it in like an ICC standard?
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah. Any other comments, or we're looking good on that? Thumbs up. Awesome. Excellent. Thank you. All right. So that brings us to the end of the matrix for today. Look at that. So now all we have left really is a couple of things. We're working on getting chapter 34 combined. That's going to be the last meeting, and that's going to be kind of the center of that last meeting is chapter 34. As you know, it's a standalone code, and this year we're working on, or this iteration, we're working on integrating it for you all for the review, and then also for inclusion in the OSSC. So we won't have to bounce between the IEBC and the OSSC any longer. And we're hoping to get it out to you early, as Terry has noted, particularly for this chapter 34. We're trying to give as much time as possible. So that puts us into kind of a scheduling question on, we have holidays coming up, not great timing. We do have the January 19th projected board review, the initial, where we start looking at these committee recommendations at the board level. And so I think Laura had identified a committee meeting date of potentially January 4th. I think that is what she's looking at, which would give us a little bit of time to make sure we get it to you early. Would also give some time for the holidays. I know a lot of folks take off vacation during that time.
Tony, did you say the next meeting is on the 9th?
No, we have I'm sorry, we have a mechanical code.
Oh, sorry.
Meeting on the, So this next meeting that we're trying to schedule and we're talking about right now. I think Laura can chime in here, but I think we've identified the 4th of January as a possibility. Going to make
Yeah,
sure that
that's when the room is available next.
okay.
That date works for me.
That would work for me also.
Works great for me.
Awesome. Elizabeth, it works for Sarah, Janice. Awesome.
Works for
Sandoval.
me, yeah.
Excellent. Look at that. Way to go, Laura. So
We have consensus.
So we are going to schedule the meeting. It's hopefully going to be the last meeting, and we're going to try to get Chapter 34 out as soon as we can. We're in a studio review session on it right now, and so we're working through that. We don't have any real tabled items, I don't believe. I think we kind of wrapped all that up today. Great work, committee, and
Yeah, I think we pushed the structural elements to the next code cycle. So that helped quite a bit. Thanks, Jeremy and gang.
yeah, absolutely. And so, well, there's some public proposals on Chapter 34. And then before we finish, depending on how long, that takes on that meeting, I'd like to take a run back through on the fiscals. So I'd like to make sure that we've identified the appropriate fiscals as required for the, rulemaking, and that Tyler's good with the information. And then after that, it's the board review, and you all get to go to the board meeting and we redo all the committee meetings basically at the board level. And no, just kidding. You don't all have to go. But fantastic work again. Thanks everybody for being here, and thanks for the additional participation from Paul and Jody and everybody else. So any questions before we go get lunch? I'm going to run to get lunch. I'm so hungry. No? Good to go? All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so
Excellent.
much. We'll
Thanks,
see you on the
everyone.
4th.
All right.
Happy holidays.
I can't remember. I'll have to look back through some documentation. There might have